welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low-Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful. A new, unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk, and we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together.
When we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third Reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
Together, we can change the world until the poor are lifted, the workers are paid, the sick are healed, the vote is not suppressed, police killing is stopped, land and water is not poisoned, war is not pushed, promoted and promulgated, humanity is respected, children are protected, civil rights, labor rights, human rights are never neglected until these things are actualized. We've got work to do, and if we do it together, if the rejected work together, generations yet unborn will rise up and remember us for the work we did, and together we will change the nation.
I know justice is coming soon.
Hey, do you believe that of today?
We're so glad to welcome everybody here on today as we have this rolling vigil where people are coming on to talk about the connection between voting rights and economic justice, and that they're not separate issues, and that voting rights is not some special issue just for Black people, but it is an issue of our democracy. Certainly, voter suppression has in it racism, classism, fear, and we need to call it out as such so that all the voices are clear, so that we're having the full kind of debate that's necessary in this democracy. So we have this going on. We were going to be watching this, as the Senate would have been debating the filibuster, which really shouldn't even be debated. It should be just debunked and thrown out. At least they should have a real filibuster. They're going to have one, not this coward filibuster where people can hide behind not voting, never have to go to the floor, never have to defend it. But be that as it may, here we are this morning. And we are so thankful for all of you who have come on this morning and will be joining from across the nation and across the country. At this time, we want to bring on Ms. Yara Allen, who will lift us in a theomusicology piece, and then Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris will give us our grounding. And after the grounding, we will then begin this rolling visual.
Good morning, Bishop Barber. Thank you so much. And good morning to everybody. As we sing this morning together, we're going to sing a song that has been the strength and undergirding of so many who fought for labor rights, women's rights, voting rights. And here we are, years and years after this song was sang and revised, singing this same song, but we are determined to be steadfast and unmovable as we sing, "We Shall Not Be Moved." Just like a tree planted by the waters, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the waters. We shall not be moved. We're standing for our voting rights. We shall not be moved. We're standing for our voting rights. We shall not be moved. Like a tree planted by the waters, we shall not be moved. Oh, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the waters. We shall not be moved. Last time, we're standing together. We're standing together. We shall not be moved. We're standing together, we shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the waters. We shall not be moved.
Amen, amen, amen. Never, never, never. Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, God bless you this morning.
Indeed, it's a good day to be together, standing here, not being moved in our conviction that we must defend this democracy. We must expand and protect voting rights. We must rise up and promote economic justice. We must raise our wages to living wages and expand healthcare and lift from the bottom so that everybody in this nation and in this world can indeed rise. So it's great to be here. As Bishop Barber said, we have dozens of leaders from state after state across this country in this rolling vigil. There's a rolling coup going on in this nation, one which is trying to deny a multiracial democracy, especially the third of the electorate that is poor and low income, from being able to establish an agenda, elect leaders that stand with the people, and promote economic justice, earth rights, immigrant rights, and all the things that we need to live in a full society. So we're here, starting in Arizona, moving to West Virginia, and going state by state, hearing from people impacted by this attack on our democracy, by the fact that we live in the richest country in the world and yet have 140 million, almost half of the US population, living in poverty, or one emergency, one healthcare crisis, one storm, one job loss away from absolute economic ruin. This is not right. We are coming together to draw the connections, to link the issues, and to stand and say, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. So Bishop Barber, it's an honor to be here with these amazing leaders, and we'll hear people's testimonies throughout this rolling vigil.
And thank you so much. And for all the members of the media that are coming, you can come on at any time. You can grab this B-roll. This is what America needs to be hearing, not just the politicians and all the technical back and forth and the ceremonial deadlines, the ceremonial debate. We don't do public policy by ceremony. We do public policy by commitment and conviction and reconstruction and a continuous moral push until our deadline is met, which is victory. That's our deadline. It always has been in the move. You never had the people who during the days of slavery said, well, our deadline is January the 1st, and if it comes and goes, we don't have freedom, then we're just through. We're gonna just stay here and suffer this. No. The women didn't say that. The women's suffrage movement, civil rights movement. So let's not start that today. Our deadline is victory. Is victory, victory. We continue to push. So let's do a team. We'll let you all take it from here, and everybody tell it as they used to say down in the hood, like it TI is.
I'm John Wessel Mccoy from the Arizona Poor People's Campaign. First of all, I'm in solidarity with the Apache Stronghold in their fight to save Oak Flat. Reverend Dr. King came to Arizona in 1964. In his speech at Arizona State University, he said, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, and whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." See, that's why we need a moral fusion movement here in Arizona and across this country. In my state, there are 2.5 million eligible low-income voters. We're a multiracial group. In 2020, less than 40% of us voted. Attacks on voting rights are intended to keep our turnout as low as possible. These attacks disproportionately target and disenfranchise Black and brown voters. But as King told us in 1964, we're tied together. We're all tied together. The end result hurts me and my family too. Attacks on voting rights makes it possible to kill programs like the child tax credit, which my 3 kids need. These racist divide and conquer politics are older than the nation itself, and they're an enemy of all poor and low wealth people in this nation, Black, brown, Asian, Native, and white folks alike. After I voted in Maricopa County in 2020, I had to watch this ridiculous spectacle downtown of the Arizona recount. That's just one example of the current outrages against the fundamentals of democracy. I heard Senator Sinema the other day saying how much she cares about our right to vote, but she just cares more about protecting the filibuster in the Senate. We're struggling here in Arizona while she's out doing a hell of a job serving the interests of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Wall Street. Prior to the pandemic, 41% of us in Arizona were poor or low wealth, and it's just gotten worse from there. But Sinema rejected Build Back Better that would improve our lives. She cited inflation. Well, I think Sinema's suffering from an overinflated commitment to protecting the rich and powerful through the filibuster. She is devaluing democracy in its most basic form, the vote, to boost the profits and power of the few. Thank you.
Okay, hi, this is Frank Thompson. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. I'm a Vietnam era veteran, 1966 to 1973. At the time that I joined the service, I was not able to vote. I was only 18, but I joined the service because I believe in this country and in the Constitution for which we stand. The Declaration of Independence states, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The organization I belong to Common Defense advocates for the passing of the Voting Rights Act, which honors the 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments. However, we have a 1950s Democrat from West Virginia and a Democrat who decided to betray the will of the people who stood up for her from Arizona. That is not the end for us, because the Constitution is also our savior. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution is not a states' right amendment, it is a people's right amendment, and we can use that aspect of the Constitution to legally change the laws in each of our states where the federal government may fail. We can change, we can create referendums and propositions by getting together with the people who are lawyers and agencies and media and move forward with the proper wording that we can put on the November election, the November ballots, and draw people out. Well, all we need is for our elected officials in Washington to leave their politician in Washington and come home and have the courage to be the leaders that we need. We are not bystanders in this. We are active participants in this fight. We are the soldiers that they need. We need them to lead us. For that value of them leading us to get the laws that we desire in each state, starting with Senator Mark Kelly in Arizona, we can then provide the laws and send a message to Washington. We can also then, for those people who support us, know for them that in January, when they walk in back to Congress, they know they have the voice of the people supporting them.
Amen, amen, amen. Is that brother, is that Frank? Is that your name?
Yes.
Frank, thank you so much. Now we have, coming from West Virginia, we've got two persons out of West Virginia that are going to continue this rolling vigil.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pamela Garrison. I'm a member of the West Virginia Poor People's Campaign. I'm here today to address my senators, both of them. You know, we've heard the rhetoric that they came out with, and if you listen to it, it don't even make any sense. We watched January the 6th, the coup that took on our Capitol. Well, we're here to say we're watching it every day. It hasn't stopped. It hasn't stopped in our Congress, our House. It hasn't stopped in our state legislatures. Here in West Virginia, our Attorney General sued to overturn the election, the fair and free election. They're down here gerrymandering our maps. They're purging our voter rolls. You tell me that you're standing for, that you're representing us, you're representing me. That's not what you're doing. You're representing your pockets, you're representing the corporations. And we're not going to stand for it. We are not. These suppressions that you've pushed on us is just an excuse to keep us poor. My daughter, the gentleman before him was talking about the child tax credit. My poor old disabled daughter's got an 8-year-old son she's raising. She gets $800 a month. Then you take and tell, for a few months, she gets a $300 a month child tax credit, to where she is not having to pay her utilities from cutoff notice to cutoff notice. She can buy my grandson a Christmas. No, we're not allowed to have that. But you know why? But you're worried about a deficit that you took and gave $2 trillion to the richest corporations there is, and you didn't filibuster that. You didn't care about the deficit and inflation then. No, the only time you care about it's on the back of us poor people and us working people. And we've had enough. And we are not stopping until we have victory.
That's it. That's exactly right. And our victory begins with even our decision to fight back, because we just won't sit, we refuse to sit here and say, this is normal and okay. Thank you so much, Pam. We got another testifying this rolling vigil from West Virginia.
Hi, I'm Stuart Acuff from Jefferson County, West Virginia. Great to be with everybody this morning. Thank you, Pam, for those wonderful words. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Liz, and particularly thank you, Bishop Barber. I have a question for all of us and for Senator Manchin today, and that is, what do you call a Democrat who opposes voting rights? There's a very apt word for it. It's called a Dixiecrat. And Joe Manchin is a Dixiecrat, and so is Kirsten Sinema. We ought to just say it like it is. Poverty brings its own barriers and burdens to voting. And poverty just got worse in West Virginia because of the sunsetting of the child tax credit that Pam was talking about. Poverty makes it harder for us to vote, particularly in a rural state like West Virginia, and even more so because of the topography and the geography of our state, with so many people living in the country in hard to get places, in deep hollers between tall mountains, no reliable transportation, and the poorer you are, the less reliable your transportation is, and hardly any public transportation in our state. So many low-income voters don't have child care when they have to go vote. We don't have same-day voting, registration and voting. And our people who make the minimum wage have to work 68 hours a week just to afford an apartment. Now, if you are a single mother raising a couple of kids and you're working 2 jobs for a total of 65 to 75 hours a week, and you don't have childcare, how do you have a right to vote? Without access to the ballot, you don't have an effective right to vote. So what do we need? We need the policies outlined in both of the voting rights bills in the Congress today. We need universal mail-in.
That's right.
We need same-day voting and registration. We need no excuse mail-in ballots. If we are going to have an effective political democracy, we have to have the right to vote. And our people want to vote. We are poor people, low-income people make up 40% of our people. 50% of our children live in low-income households. But of our 50% of low-income people in West Virginia vote. So we want to vote, but we have to have access to the ballot. And that's what this public policies outlined in our legislation would do. Let me just finally say and remind Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin that a Democrat who opposes the right to vote, and I mean opposes in reality, not saying, well, you would vote for it if there wasn't a filibuster. If you believed in it, you'd end the filibuster so we could get a vote on voting rights.
That's right. That's right.
And how can we pretend to be a democracy if all our people don't have the same access to the vote? I'll be done with this. There's just, there's a wonderful word to describe folks who call themselves Democrats, but do not believe in low income and equality of access to the ballot. And that is a Dixiecrat. And we got 2 Dixiecrats standing in the government house door, in the Capitol House door, keeping our people from access to democracy. Thank you. I'm sorry I went too long.
No, Scott, thank you so much, because we ain't going to be whistling Dixie. We got to be whistling justice. And we got to be whistling transformation. This is exactly this is what the nation needs to hear. Now we've got thousands of people going to be on and coming on. We pushed this out to hundreds of thousands of people. We're sending it over to media. I did make a mistake. I own it this morning on voucher. I was just a little brain fog from the recovery of COVID, but I got him to agree to tweet it out to all of his people and so as to Joy Reid as well and some others. Let me just say, I'm going to step back now. I want the team that's on, when you call on states, call them enthusiastically. I want to know, I need to know you all to send to me who's taking the different hours or different 30 minutes, so I'll know who the leader is bringing people in. But when you bring folk in, bring them in with great respect, great enthusiasm, as we now go through the South. We go through the South, and then we continue across this nation with this rolling vigil. And I believe, I'll turn it over to you, Yolanda, if you're heading that up, and if you all can just send me those notes so I'll know who's doing it over the next few hours. God bless you all. Love you. Let's keep rolling. Let's keep rolling. Let's keep rolling. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now.
Thank you, Bishop, and absolutely, let's keep rolling. Let's keep going. Our deadline is victory. Up next, please let's welcome Joyce Atkins and Tanya Fogel from Kentucky.
Good morning. So my name is Joyce Atkins. I live close to Bowling Green, Kentucky, in a little town called Smiths Grove. And I'm going to speak to the issue of how voter ID laws disenfranchise older voters, because this is the first year in which Kentucky will have a voter ID law in place. So many people that were born in this country in the 1940s and the 1950s in the rural South were delivered by midwives who did not file a birth certificate. So that means that they can't get a driver's license, they cannot get ID and not been registered to vote. Photo ID laws hit older people, the poor, African Americans, and students the hardest. The older you get, the more likely that you won't have an ID. If you did have an ID, a lot of older people give up their driver's licenses and they don't replace that with a state issued ID. Well, you might say, well, they could if they wanted to, but that would mean they'd have to find a ride to the DMV or come up with the money for a bus or the metro. They might have to change buses or trains 3 or 4 times. Maybe they're on a walker or in a wheelchair, and it just gets more complicated from there. A lot of older people have lost their birth certificate several years ago, and it cost $55. And y'all, I was able to do that at that time, but there have been many, many years in my life when I couldn't even afford to pay my rent. So certainly I would not have been able to come up with $55 for a birth certificate, and I would have just been out of luck when it came to going to the polling place. Another thing that happens with older people, they may have changed their name through marriage or divorce, and especially in some states that can add a lot more complications. Also, we know more than a sixth or 18% of voters with disabilities reported difficulties voting in person in 2020. The older you get, the more likely it is that you're going to have a disability, and that includes a lot of people. But I'm just going to end up and say to our legislators, both our state legislators, which are mostly Republicans, and our federal legislators, which are all Republicans, no matter what your timeline is for voting on voting rights, legislation might be, for us older folks, the deadline is nothing short of victory. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Nothing short of victory. Tanya, go ahead.
Hey, this is Tana Fogel coming straight out of Lexington, Kentucky. Just when I didn't think it could get any worse by having a senator called McConnell, I look over in West Virginia and man, I don't know who's running the race of being the worst representative of the nation. And, you know, they swore into office that they would represent the people. They lied. And so when they start lying there, it was easy for them just to trickle on down and keep lying. Let's just jump into it. I am an impacted person. I served out a 10-year prison sentence, and I stand in the gap for all those folks who made a mistake, but aren't mistakes. We are probably some of the best leaders that you could ever find because we had a dream before we misbehaved. Ex-offender is a title that went with my misbehavior. It's not who God created me to be. Do you know that over 680,000 Kentuckians, low income, could have voted in 2016, but just the hardship of trying to get to the ballot box, 1 out of every 4 African Americans cannot vote. So if we are one of the states that is leading mass incarceration, so you take away the vote and we can't vote in jails, we can't vote in prisons here in Kentucky, and that's just a hot mess. So let me tell you about the moral fusion that the Poor People's Campaign is doing. The National Poor People's, what's hurting me in Kentucky is hurting in Alabama, is hurting in West Virginia, all across the nation. Can you imagine the poor and the low income people coming to the ballot box? Okay, yeah, it's difficult to go to the ballot box, but what if we did everything we could to make sure that our vote counted? We could overturn this madness that's going on. So I'm here to represent Kentucky. You know what it's going to take? An amendment to our Constitution. In our Constitution in Kentucky, they have placed another barrier that people who have been incarcerated lose their right to vote, and an executive order has to restore your right to vote. So it's a lot of barriers that's going on in Kentucky. Some of those are closing precincts, not allowing people to vote that has felonies in their past, and these voter ID laws. What I want to say to you out there, please get involved. Please get involved. This is an attack on our democracy, attack on the future of my kids. Something like child support. My son had 1 year sentence. It enhanced to 10 years, which kicked him out of the voting right to vote. So it's little things like that. I want to say forward together, not one damn step back where they're trying to take us back, but we're going to move forward. We're going to move forward together, and let's go, Poor People's Campaign. Thank you for this video. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mad as hell.
Absolutely. What the pain we're feeling in Kentucky, we're feeling all across the country, and we are going to be moving forward together and not one step back. Please, I want to welcome folks from Texas and Mississippi. Julio Acosta.
Yeah, I'm Pastor Jose Torres from here from Mississippi, and we just been so affected here at the year 2019 for the immigration, one of the largest immigration rapes we ever have, and impact all the immigration community, all the immigrant community, and it's just sad to see how the government, do this situation where they didn't even thinking about, they dealing with the humans, they thinking they dealing with probably animals, and the way they did the immigration rape here in the state of Mississippi, it was divided families and also affecting so many children through this process and this situation we dealing with. And it was a tough situation, and now, we still not have voter rights, and they try to take that away. They keep taking away from immigrant communities, so they don't have a way to get out there in the ballot and vote, and that way they can keep the immigrant community under control. So the voter right will affecting. It's been affecting immigrant community really, really bad. So it's time to wake up and stick together, and we cannot make the situation better unless we get together and we pull together. And through the Poor People campaign, we really so happy we've been able to, do things we have not we didn't know we can do. But now we see the power we have when we coming together with all the races from all over. You can call yourself white, black, pink, or whatever, but that's really important to know. We can make the situation better. We look future. Our future it gonna get better, but we have to stick together and fight together, and not like we always say, not one step back. We got to move forward. And the immigrant community in Mississippi, with the Mississippi Poor People campaign, we organize and mobilize and really educate our community to make the situation better. But we cannot stay silent anymore. We are go speak up, and we go do what we need to do. But this government, they cannot keep using us as a fishing bite, because that's why they're using us every election, and try to using us just to say, oh, we go deporting so many people, we go do this, we go do that. But they never try to see how can they do to reaching out the immigrants so they can be part of this country, because it's so many jobs out there they willing to do when some other people don't want to do. So, but through the Poor People campaign, I know we're gonna keep moving forward. We're not gonna make one step back. I just want to say thank you so much to Poor People campaign, and I'm there, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Torres. And you're absolutely right. Our future will get better, because when we're united in our pursuit for justice, there's no way we're going to lose.
Right.
So thank you. Thank you. I want to welcome Reverend Kenneth and Reverend Tracy Nelson from Mississippi. And then we'll go to Pastor Jose from Mississippi.
Good morning. We are
Reverend Kenneth Nelson from Mississippi.
Evangelist Tristan Nelson from Mississippi. I'm going to talk about voter rights, healthcare, and education. As African Americans, we are not being protected by the voting rights of 1964. In Mississippi alone, we have 218,000 voters that cannot vote because they are a convicted felon, which includes 117,000 Black people. Okay, we have the lowest percent of low-income voter registration. We have the lowest percent of voter income turnout. People don't come out to vote. Our lowest of the low income. Black people are incarcerated in Mississippi 3 times the rate as white people. In Mississippi alone, did you know we lack quality health care? Why? Because our wages are low, and families are having to choose. Do we pay for health care, or do we pay our mortgage? Do we pay for food, or do we pay our mortgage? Okay. Our education system in Mississippi, we have several gaps. According to the data, in 2018, we was rated number 44 as far as providing a quality education. Our 4th grade students in Mississippi are not proficient in reading. So guess what? When the system fails, they have no other hope. Okay, we need to stop the filibuster. We need to help us help the Black people. We're not going to stop fighting. You stop fighting us. We have a voice, and our voices do matter. We will win.
All right. Also with that, in the state of Mississippi, we believe that equal voting rights will lead to economic equality in our great state. When the voting rights are improved and the voting is beneficial to everyone in the state of Mississippi, we need to pursue political accountability to close the economic and wealth gap for Blacks and other minorities. We also need to push for a change in the public policy of how wealth and resources are distributed and made available to Blacks and minorities. In Mississippi alone, there are 48% of the Mississippians are poor and low income. That's 1.3 million people just right here in the state of Mississippi. 65% of those are Black. That's 708,000. 66% are Latino. From 1972 to 2012, income grew for the richest top 1% by 80%. but it only grew for the bottom 99%, only 11%. In 2018, 53% of the Mississippi workers, which is 587,000 people, earned under $15 an hour. That's the fourth highest state in the nation. Also this year, the richest 1% can expect an average tax cut of $35,400, while the poorest 20% can only expect an average tax cut of just $20. We're talking about the poor and low income. This is a portion of the systematic racism that we face here in Mississippi. The widening of this economic gap leads to the increase in poverty, crime, mass incarceration, and personal debt. These conditions cost the state billions of dollars to manage and facilitate. These same dollars that are used to manage and facilitate these disparities can be used to empower our poor and low income communities with resources to revitalize and sustain itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words. And you're absolutely right. When voting rights are improved, our lives are improved. And that's what this is all about. Voting is a great equalizer because every single one of us across the nation, when we have one vote, doesn't matter rich, poor, black, white, young, old, that one vote is our power and is our voice. So thank you. And I want to invite Julio Acosta from Texas to please come up.
Hi everyone, hola todos. My name is Julio Acosta, pronouns he, él, from Dallas, Texas. I'm an affected person, and every single person in the United States of America is affected by voter legislation. Voting affects all kinds of justice. It affects racial justice, economic justice, social justice, environmental justice, and more. And I am so proud to be on board with Poor People's Campaign and everybody on this call and everybody across the nation that stands together for righteousness, for justice, and equity for all of us. In Texas, the state legislature this last session, they actually tried to make it tougher to vote. Here in Texas, actually, first, let me say, in other states, there's same-day voter registration, there's online voter registration, there's even automatic voter registration in other states. In Texas, you have to be registered to vote 30 days before you can vote. And this last legislative cycle, the state legislature made it even tougher to be able to vote in Texas. There's actually even an article, recent article that came out that's talking about how some mail-in ballots or mail-in voting applications are being denied for more information and other things. So basically, Texas, we definitely need to make voting easier, not harder. And we really, really need all solutions to save democracy. We need all solutions that will make it easier for people to vote, not harder. So we are in unison with everyone across the nation. I just want to say a few words in Spanish. Hola a todos. Nos estamos unidos con todas estas personas a través de lo que es el país de Estados Unidos, porque todos nosotros somos afectados por lo que es nuestra habilidad de votar. Lo que es la justicia social, racial, ambiental, la justicia económica, todo eso está afectado por lo que es nuestro derecho a votar. Así que les pedimos a todos que por favor únanse a estas organizaciones como la campaña para los derechos, para el Poor People's Campaign y otras campañas que están luchando por los votos, por el derecho de votar en todo Estados Unidos. Yo represento lo que es Texas, donde esta última legislatura, la legislación de Texas lo hizo más difícil para votar. Sabemos que aquí en Texas tienes que estar registrado para votar 30 días antes y sabemos que hay otros estados que tienen votación automática, que tienen votación o registración para votación en línea y registración para votar el mismo día. Y necesitamos ese tipo de cosas y necesitamos más soluciones para que la gente en Estados Unidos pueda votar. Así que únanse a todos estos esfuerzos y una vez más, muchas gracias a Poor People's Campaign. Thank you again to the Poor People's Campaign and everyone fighting for justice. Thank you to all justice seekers.
Thank you, Julio Acosta from Texas, for those powerful words. I'm going to stay in Texas. Danita Jones, please come on up.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Julio, my fellow Texan. I come to you from Dallas, Texas, and as Julio stated, Texas has passed several voter suppression laws, that's what you can call them, to prevent Texans from voting. Texas has always been one of the hardest states in the nation to vote. They've banned 24-hour voting, they've banned drive-through voting, and then they've made it illegal for you to use a mail-in ballot if you didn't request it. Now, I don't know about you, but life happens sometimes, and sometimes I forget to ask for a mail-in ballot. You forget, especially with the pandemic that we have going on now in Texas. Our numbers are rising with COVID. We're averaging 14,000 cases a day, not a week, a day. So it's imperative that people get these mail-in ballots. And so what? You forget to request one, but one comes to you. So now your vote is invalid because you didn't ask for it, you didn't request it. And that's what's happening here in Texas. And that's what they decided to do, that because someone didn't ask for a ballot, they cannot use that ballot to vote. So now they have to get out in these conditions to vote in the pandemic, where we're not even getting in support on that matter. You know, so it is imperative that we listen. Right now, Texas has 12.6 million poor and low income voters. 12.6. And you're prohibiting us from voting. You want us to go out into the belly of the beast of this thing called COVID and vote, but yet you won't provide us adequate health care when we contract COVID. So what are we to do when we protect our families? We have to choose between protecting our families and protecting our vote. That, my friends, is not a democracy.
Thank you, Danita, for those powerful words. You're right. When our vote is muted, that is not a democracy. I want to welcome Wanda Bryant from Alabama, followed by Reverend Tani Algood.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Tani Allgood from Mobile, Alabama. I'm one of the tri-chairs for the Alabama Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Voting rights and economic rights go hand in hand. Historically, those in power and the politicians who represent them have tried to portray poverty and voting rights as a Black issue. This is not true, but they do this to try to keep poor whites, poor Blacks, Latinos, and other people of color separated along racial lines. It's like what Herod did. Anytime he wanted the slaves started getting together, he would cause division among them so he could stay in power and they would be enslaved. Concerning poverty, before the pandemic, there were 2.1 million poor or low-income people in Alabama. Now, 762,000 of these were Black, 141,000 are Latinx, and the largest number, 1.1 million, are white. But you would not know this listening to the media or listening to the politicians. They make up 45% of Alabama's population who are adversely affected by voter repression laws. Alabama has a lot of ways to suppress voters and keep them in poverty. Now, a clear example of this is in Birmingham, Alabama, when the voters of Birmingham passed an ordinance to increase the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $10.11 an hour. Now, the ink hadn't even dried on the results when the Alabama legislature passed a law making it illegal for any municipality in Alabama to increase their minimum wage. So what they had to do, they had to undermine our democracy in order to steal our votes and keep people in poverty. Alabama has one of the highest poverty rates of any state in the union. Voter suppression and economic rights are inextricably connected. If we are to get our voting rights, our economic rights, in environmental devastation, then we must mobilize, organize, register, and most of all, educate. Forward together, not one step back. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Allgood. You're absolutely right. Voting rights are economic justice. And when we organize and mobilize, that is how we will achieve these goals. I want to welcome Wanda Bryant from Alabama, followed by folks from Georgia, Jamil Hill and Neil Tellier. So go ahead, Wanda. Wanda, could you unmute?
Can you hear now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. First of all, I would like to say that our democracy is stronger when everybody gets involved. I'm an impacted person, and Alabama is one of the states that brought the lawsuit in 2013 that gutted the Voting Rights Act and allowed other states to rules that suppress the Black and Latino votes. And Alabama has a shameful past. When we vote for leaders to represent us and our ideas, the leaders are supposed to support our interests. Voting is our responsibility. And it also shows where we stand on the issues. If we don't vote, we hand our powerful political power to views that we might oppose. Alabama is also one of the 11 states that don't allow early voting, and they still require an affidavit with 2 witnesses for a mail-in vote. They've also closed a lot of polling areas, which discourage people when they get to one polling area to go to the next polling area. And we've seen this so much in the past when marginalized communities don't have the representation that they deserve. Like the Jim Crow laws, when they were created without the Black community input, so which made it harmful to the Black community. The people, they died for us, they were threatened for us, they lost their jobs for us, they were beat up for us. And so we're not gonna stop fighting for our voting rights and all injustices until we win with no deadline. Voting, when you vote, your voice will not be heard if you don't vote. Voting is power unleashed.
Thank you, Wanda. Absolutely. I'll say that again. Voting is our power. So please come on up, Jamel Hill from Georgia, and then Neil Tellier from Georgia as well.
Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Jamel Hill, and I'm here on behalf of the Georgia Poor People's Campaign. I'm here on behalf of the 140 poor and low-income people who are struggling to survive in what has been called the greatest nation on earth. The Honorable Reverend Martin Luther King told us that there can be no second-class citizens in a first-class nation. But that's exactly what we are. That's what we are in their eyes. We're second-class citizens, and that's why the rich have gotten richer while the poor and low income continue to be just that. So essentially what you see, the same things that are happening in Mississippi, I heard our good people say, those same things are happening here in Georgia. That's why the Poor People's Campaign is asking for a moral fusion, for a moral revival. That is why we can't stop and we won't stop. We fought for equality, human rights, civil rights, voting rights. That was less than 100 years ago. But you all, we can't stop and we won't stop. We are doing more. We are mobilizing and organizing. We are registering. We are educating and energizing because we can't stop and we won't stop because the fight continues today. Here it is in Georgia. Recently, there were over 300 laws that were implemented to keep for voter suppression. Guess what? Just heard my good people in Texas saying the same thing. Again, this is a fusion movement. This isn't white and black. This is us working for us. And you know what? We won't stop until victory is ours. What does that look like? So glad you asked. Voting rights, minimum wage raise, the third Reconstruction, immigration reform. We can't stop and we won't stop until victory is ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamel. You're right. We won't stop. We won't stop till victory is ours. Neil Tellier from Georgia, go ahead.
All right. Greetings from Augusta, Georgia, the Central Savannah River area. My name is Pastor Neil Tellier, and I am a tri-chair on the coordinating committee of the Georgia Poor People's Campaign, which I am a proud member of. And I come to you on behalf of the 4.6 million poor and low-income voters in the state of Georgia, where we represent 45% of the state's population. That's 45% of the state's population. Almost 50% of our state is poor and low income. I heard our friends in Alabama, Mississippi, and all across the country saying about the same percentage of people. Here in Georgia, though, an estimated 66.2% of the population voted in the 2020 election cycle. The Georgia Poor People's Campaign, the Poor People's Campaign, and the National Call for Moral Revival efforts reached over 39,000 non-voters from the 2016 to the 2020 election cycle, more than 3 times the margin of victory. And we can't claim to be the reason for that victory, but we sure as heck can show the power and impact that the poor and low-income voters have when they are more directly engaged together in the electoral process. So I'm here today to implore our leaders to pass the voting rights legislation and to help combat those extremely classist and racist voting legislation bills of all the states that have spoken before me and all those states that'll speak behind me. And in our state, it was called the Georgia Senate Bill 202, and they passed that into law on March 25th. Some of those provisions of the 98-page Senate bill being criminalizing the giving of water and snacks to those waiting in line. They are restricting and removing drop box access. There will be no weekend voting. So souls to the polls, one of the most famous and useful things that we have here in the state of Georgia for our church folks and our people of color that utilize was removed. The ability to send people home if the line is too long and tell them to return in our larger district. The ability to remove up to 4 members of a local election board. They said it would rarely happen. And we haven't even had any real elections yet. And they've already done it in 6 democratically leaning counties with a Republican-controlled Congress. So as I said in Washington, with the provisions of the 98-page Georgia Senate Bill 202 being heinous enough, it's the lies that these provisions support, the lies that they are trying to validate in order to undermine our democracy. With 60% of those who are specifically responsible for creating these laws actually believing that the 2020 election was in fact stolen. If it were not for these reprehensible lies, this bill would never have been written, as the same people that wrote these laws changed the laws in 2016 because they didn't like that Senator Barack Obama won 2 terms as the president. So they changed them to get their guy elected 45. So I ask today that Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock, it's time for our voting rights legislation to be passed. We ask that you compromise no longer and that you move forward together and not one step back.
Absolutely, forward together and not one step back, from Georgia to Alabama and all across this country. Trish Brown from Florida, please come on up.
Sorry about that, a little bit of lighting problem. Hi, my name is Trish Brown, and I'm from the Florida Poor People's Campaign. Let me get to the point. Florida is in a state of emergency with housing no longer affordable, y'all. The homeless population continues to rise while our marginalized, incarcerated, and our working class communities continue to be impacted by the spike in COVID cases. We struggle to make ends meet with no sustainable living wages or affordable health care. We're dying here. DeSantis continues to run our state under a tyranny and militia rule instead of prioritizing and focusing on bills that protect and secure our people's lives and our human rights, keeping us safe. He's focused on bills that continue to oppress, repress, and disenfranchise our Black, brown, LGBTQ+, veterans, youth, seniors, folks with disabilities and trauma, mental health, and our working class people. Voter suppression bills like SB 90 that he signed, 48-page law that modifies the rules for observers to in a way that could disrupt elections and administration, restricting the ability to provide food and support to voters waiting in line, aiming at mail-in voting. Voters must provide a state ID or 4-digit social security to obtain a mail-in ballot, shorten the period during which a voter can remain on the state's vote by mail-in list, make it harder for voters to access secure ballot at drop-off boxes. Boxes must be staffed by county employees, which is likely to further restrict the hours of availability. And then they turn around with this: local election officials will be subjected to $25,000 in fine if they make drop-off boxes available beyond the strict limits imposed by laws, making it difficult for voters to receive help with requests and return of mail-in ballots in so many ways. Harder for state and local officials to solve problems and protect voters. Our Floridians need policies and legislation that are going to provide automatic voter registration in multiple locations, legislation that provides for same-day registration, no excuse mail-in voting, early voting, more polling stations, extended and longer voting hours for working class people that get off late, and protect our observers who support and assist voters when issues occur at the polls. DeSantis laughs and says that Florida is free state, that we're a free state. While we remain third place in this pandemic, people are starving and dying. Stay out of our education system. Stay away from our First Amendment rights and our right to take to the streets. This is not what democracy looks like. We are not free. We must continue to keep organizing, organizing, organizing. When voting rights are under attack, what do? We stand up and we fight back, because voting rights are a human right and everybody's got the right to live. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Trish. Thank you for bringing those words, for that powerful testimony, for laying out clearly what our demands are around voting rights and everyone having access to the ballot. And thank you for the powerful fight that you are waging in Florida, such a key place to be fighting around voting rights. Thank you. We are going to move next to South Carolina. We are going to hear from Reverend Amiri Hooker, and then we will move to Keisha Smith.
Good morning again, Poor People's Campaign. I am Reverend Amiri Bernard Hooker, a local pastor at Wesley Chapel, United Methodist Church in Lake City, South Carolina. The United Methodist Church calls for a vision of a beloved community founded on economic and racial justice, and includes strengthening voting rights as our discipline of the United Methodist Church suggests that that's what we should do. And our church believes in calling leaders and holding leaders accountable to a free election for all persons, and all leaders, red, blue, or even purple, should make sure that all citizens have a right to vote. And that's what we believe in. My church for years has organized soul to the polls, has provided water and food for polling places, has given people, just because our congregation believes in the right to vote. Voting rights impacts me directly, because I want legislators and I want persons running for office that have been duly elected by the people to do the work for the people. They will not vote against the people, but will vote for things like healthcare, will vote for things right now we're suffering through a second round of COVID in our family. And I'm tired of legislators not doing the right thing. As we celebrate this weekend the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. in the coming days, we have an opportunity and responsibility to continue the journey for justice, for which so many have fought, have died, have sighed, and worked for. South Carolina, our legislators, they need to do right. And nationally, it's not about a party. It's not about holding party line or using a coward filibuster. What it's really about is letting every citizen be represented and heard. And in all honesty, I think voting rights can go even further than the current legislation. I don't see why I can vote for America's Top Best model, and I can vote for the next singer, but I can't use my cell phone to vote for my elected officials. It's time that we got out of last decade, moved forward into the future, and allowed every citizen a right to speak up and to vote. I'm writing a sermon right now on voting rights for tomorrow, for Sunday. I'm excited about what God is going to do, but I need my legislators to follow God, follow the will of people, and let America vote. Thank you. Forward together, we are moving.
Thank you, Reverend Hooker. Keisha, will you bring us a few words?
Yes, good morning, everyone. And I am Keisha Smith out of Greenville, South Carolina. Thank you guys for having me on this call. And I agree with each and every panelist, what has been spoken thus far. I am a single organization. I believe in voting rights. I believe for better voting rights in South Carolina. I agree that we need to have same-day registration and you're able to vote. I am also encouraging my community as an activist, as a leader, as a grassroots activists to come out and vote. The importance on voting, especially the importance on voting in our local elections. In Greenville, South Carolina, there is data that shows that our local elections, we do not have a very big turnout. We may have some 300 voters that consistently come out. And this is the area that's most concerning to me. The presidential elections are always the hype and folks are always out at our presidential elections, but we need those midterm elections. We need those better turnouts, and we need to hold all legislators and local electors accountable for their position and to make sure that they're backing everybody up, low income, all around the globe. We also need to encourage and explain why it's so important that we vote and that we are voting in our local elections. Those are the elections that we really lose in. We don't have the correct representation in. And thank you guys for listening to my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Keisha and Reverend Hooker, for joining us from South Carolina. We're so happy to have you on this morning. We're going to move next to North Carolina, where they are no strangers in beating back these repressive voting rights laws. I'm so happy to bring on my friends Kim Porter and George Friday. Thank you for being on today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am Kim Porter. I'm from North Carolina. Was having a few technical difficulties, but I'm here and I'm back. I am co-chair for the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign for Environmental Devastation. I work as a community organizer for NC Warren. I'm on the board of SARN, Southern Anti-Racism Network, and Community Roots. And of course, here to talk with y'all about voter Suppression in North Carolina, which is where I'm from. And, you know, what we're looking at all over the country is just rampant voter suppression and poverty. Before the pandemic, 44%, almost half of North Carolina's population was poor, low income. It's even higher now. We're talking 2.6 million children. Okay, we're talking 58% of our Black people and Indigenous population, 67% of Latinx population, 40% Asian, and 36% white people. It's gotten out of control. We know that about 370,000 North Carolinians reported last year at this time not having enough food to eat. In 2016, 920,000 low-income people were eligible to vote and didn't vote. Part of that was because of misinformation about voter ID laws that weren't in existence, but our unlawful assembly in North Carolina is full of misinformation and always trying to pass laws that inhibit voting. We look at especially HBCUs and areas like that, where they'll try to split the colleges and do that so that we have college populations in different voting sections. It just has to stop. We know that ALEC uses North Carolina as one of the places to test their legislation. We are like ground zero, like a lot of the places in the country, for environmental devastation and environmental racism. We're looking at right now with hog farming, the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign did a civil rights complaint with Duplin County NAACP with the Southern Environmental Law Center to investigate deaths that can be attributed to hog farming, almost 200 in North Carolina. So that's going on, and the EPA will be investigating that. And who decides who heads the EPA? That's our president. That's an appointed position. Just like in North Carolina, we have Duke Energy, which is the largest corporate utility in the country, the second largest in the world. International headquarters is in Charlotte, North Carolina. And our Utilities Commission in North Carolina makes a lot of decisions about Duke Energy, and who appoints them? Our governor. So who we vote for matters, and who we have to choose to vote for matters. And in our two-party system, things aren't always as good as they sound. And we need to have more people to vote for. We need to have more parties to vote for. And dealing with what we have today, we need to make sure that who we have in power is making the right decisions for those things. That's why we have to go forward together in looking at what's happening. As far as me and my situation, you know, I'm a middle-class white woman, but I got COVID last year. I got very sick, and then I broke my leg. And even though I had a decent job, I had over $100,000 of medical bills, and we don't have Medicaid expansion in North Carolina. We need to keep fighting for that, as we do in other places in the country. But I was looking at over $100,000 worth of bills for breaking my leg and for COVID. I had a family member I had to take care of who got pneumonia and was almost hospitalized 4 different times. My dad's had COVID. I've had several family members who've had COVID, who've been very safe and been vaccinated. And what we know is that the decisions that we make today, how hard we fight, really is going to impact lives, our lives, and lives of the people that we love, lives of people we don't even know. And that's why it's important to fight against voter suppression. And that's why in North Carolina and all across the country, we have to unify, we have to work together, and we have to fight back. And we don't finish until we have victory. But you know what? It's going to be a long road, but we already have been victorious, and we are going to continue that fighting until we have equity, until we don't have these parties who have war machines. I mean, we're talking almost half of our budget is spent on war. We need to fight for environmental stability, clean air and clean water, health care for everyone, good jobs, good green jobs. And we need to continue to fight against racism and fight for equity for all. Forward together, not one step back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim, for drawing those connections for us. George, come on and talk to us.
All right. Good morning and happy Saturday. although our topic isn't very happy. I'm George Friday. I live in Gaston County, North Carolina, and I work for Peace and Justice. I have the honor of working for North Carolina Peace Action and United for Peace and Justice. I'm also on the North Carolina leadership team for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And I'm here to tell y'all that a lot of what we've heard are all of the ways we know about that they try to steal our elections. But North Carolina, as Brianna pointed out, and Kim alluded to, is like where they test the shenanigans they will try elsewhere. Way back in 1990, when I was a young woman, and working to do voter education, registration, and get out the vote in very rural North Carolina, part of the state from Cabarrus County to Moore County, over a 2-hour drive, this one congressional district, where neither party wanted to bother doing any voter work because it was so rural, mostly Black and brown and low income. Well, we did a lot of people, got a lot of people registered, and they got scared. And I don't know who they is, but they did some really shady things. I'm gonna tell y'all one of them because it's so egregious. Okay, so back then, we're talking summer of 1990. It's October, November, a few weeks before the elections. But that whole summer, folks, most of the folks we worked with worked in manufacturing, mills, and that kind of thing. And they were on short shifts, working 4- and 6-hour shifts. And for low-income people, not working a full day is rough. So the Saturday before elections, not Friday, because Friday we could have found out and done something about it. But the Saturday before elections, people went to work. You're now on mandatory double shifts. Now, party is like, great, 12-hour shifts? Oh, the layoff is over. We're going to make money. 6 o'clock to 6 p.m. polls close at 6. Now, in these counties, these were not plants or manufacturing places owned by one company. These were several different companies at the same time that Saturday saying, you work 12-hour shifts, mandatory. No going to church, no voting. What happened the Wednesday after elections? Oh, what do you say they went back to 4- to 6-hour shifts? Yes. Now that is some, I don't have the words because, you know, Reverend Barbara's here. And I got to act right. But that fuels what we see now. That was like the little baby test of, oh, we got away with this in North Carolina. What are we going to do in Ohio? Let's do some stuff in Kentucky. Let's mess with people in West Virginia. Let's nationally suppress the vote or eliminate the opportunity to expand democracy to people. No, we ain't having it. With the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, we are building the power to make the demand. Y'all know Frederick Douglass says power concedes nothing without demand. Senators, y'all don't notice. This is the demand. We're not going away. Yes, Kim said it's a long-term struggle, but we are in it. We will do the work, build the power, and you, senators, have a chance to get on the right side of history here, or we will continue to come after you and make sure there's accountability for not doing your job and not doing right by your people. Many blessings. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you so much, George. Thank you, North Carolina folks, for being on this morning. We see that they, as you testified, George, are going to try so many different tactics to suppress the vote. And like you said, we've got to be here to organize against that and bring the power. So happy that you could join us this morning. And we are going to move to Oklahoma next. We're going to hear from Bradley Hanover and Marianne Smith. Come on and talk to us, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bradley Abner, and I am from great state of Oklahoma. It's not so great these days. We are a carceral state. We like to lock people up and send them to jail. We are the 3rd highest ranking carceral state in the world for men, and the 1st when it comes to women. What all this adds up to is people that can't vote. People in jail can't vote. 57% of the eligible voting population in Oklahoma turned out to vote in 2016 out of 2.7 million eligible voters. And that includes 57% of 178,000 eligible Black voters, 33% of 150,000 eligible Latinx voters, and 59% of 2.1 million eligible white voters. More than 58,000 residents cannot vote due to felony disenfranchisement. And that includes over 15,000 Black people, or 7% of our Black population in Oklahoma. For the 28,000 people currently imprisoned in the state of Oklahoma, 49% are people of color. And Black residents are incarcerated at almost 5 times the rate of white residents. What does that mean? That means that people of color aren't being represented at the polls. That means people of color aren't getting the chance to vote. That means people of color are being, their voices are being suppressed at a much more massive amount than people that look like myself. Oklahoma currently ranks 46 states in the quality of child education. When it comes to child education, don't you think that goes into playing a part when we educate our children to do right, to do the right things? Maybe they aren't going to get a chance to go to jail. Maybe they have a chance to make better choices. It all plays a part. It all goes together. But we want to sit here and just lock people up and throw people in jail and take away their right to vote. In Oklahoma, we're trying to put a little stop to that. People are sitting in jail right now at the county level, and they can't afford their bail so that they can get out until their judgment day. So they're sitting in jail, disenfranchised. Well, we go to where they at, and we go to where they're at, and we're trying to help these people who are disenfranchised, but they're not fully disenfranchised. We're trying to help them to vote. We need to do better about the carceral state in this country. We need to do better about locking people up, and we need to do better about helping people to vote. Thank you.
I'm Marianne. I'm from Oklahoma. I am also a tri-chair along with Bradley. I'm going to build a little bit on what he just said. In regards to incarceration, women in Oklahoma, the number of women in Oklahoma incarcerated is double the national average. Many of these women are charged with more serious crimes than what they committed. A woman may commit a misdemeanor assault, but she's actually charged with a felony. That affects not only the woman, the registered voter, but it affects the whole family, her children. I said before, and I'll say it again, our children are our future and we're failing them. Never did I think that my grandchildren, and I have 6 of them, would have fewer voting rights than I did at their age. But this is a fact. Just recently, 3 days ago to be exact, the Senate GOP Twitter account put out and Senator James Lankford retweeted it, a tweet that said, and I quote, "Democrats want to silence millions of Americans by eliminating the filibuster. My reply to them is that, to them all, the Senate is using the filibuster to suppress and eliminate the right to vote of millions of Americans. Our right to vote is constitutional. The filibuster is not. So let's get real here. Oklahoma stands behind and is continuing to build and work on voter expansion, not voter suppression. And we will continue to work. We will continue to contact our senators, our representatives, and not just ask them. We are demanding our constitutional rights, and the time is now, and our deadline is when we get what we are demanding. So forward together, not one step back. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Marianne and Bradley, for being on with us this morning and for those powerful testimonies. We're going to move next to Kansas. We're going to hear from Mark Pringle and Oshara Hayes. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Oshara, and I am with the Kansas Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. And I'm speaking on voting rights and how our rights are being taken away in the state of Kansas. But we need to pass voting rights legislation on federal level so that we can have our rights. Our voting rights are under attack. Our supermajority legislators have enacted extreme voter suppression laws, calling it voter integrity. There is no integrity when you make and create laws to tell people they cannot register people to vote. And if they are perceived as voting officials, they can be charged with a felony. And then in turn, they get a felony which takes their right to vote away. This is called voter suppression. And the people have a right to vote. And our senators, Jerry Moran and Senator Roger Marshall, need to support and pass the voting rights legislation. There is no integrity when there is a supermajority pushing the boundaries on restricting, changing the flow of elected officials in congressional districts. This is suppression. We deserve our voting rights. We deserve federal legislation across the board that protects our rights to vote. Pass the voting rights legislation, Senator Jerry Moran and Senator Roger Marshall. There is no integrity when you choose to take the rights of people to vote away. There is no integrity to threaten felony prosecution or anyone mistaken for election worker. There is no integrity for voters skips elections. You make them inactive. They get purged from voting rolls. We need same-day registration. We need access for folks who are working outside of voting polls. Senator Manchin and Sinema, do the right thing. Pass the voting rights legislation. Senator Jerry Moran and Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas, do the right thing and vote for our voting rights. Voting rights are a human right. We will not stop until we have victory. When we lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Forward together, not one step back.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Mark. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brianna. I'm Mark Pringle. I'm a small family farmer from southeastern Kansas. I'm honored to be a part of the Poor People's Campaign and appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I would like to talk about the crisis of silent poverty affecting many of us who live in rural Kansas. As a small family farmer, I have seen the effects of this poverty in my community, and it has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. The lack of available health care, especially mental health services, the underfunding of public schools, and limited economic opportunities underscore this continuing crisis. It has also led to an exodus from our rural areas, especially amongst young people. The situation is especially critical for our small family farmers who find themselves increasingly left behind by federal and state government, thanks to the policies which favor large corporate farms. These policies have also been instrumental in creating a debt crisis, which has increased the rate of suicides among farmers and also put many farmers out of business. There is also a political crisis in Kansas, one that's been created by increasingly restrictive voting laws affecting the rights of voting and also for registration, along with the gerrymandering efforts that have been initiated by the Republican Party. These laws have made it more difficult to vote and also disenfranchise voters as well. All of these crises affect all of Kansas, not just certain communities or certain parts of the state. The Kansas Poor People's Campaign will continue in its effort to expand the moral narrative of public policy and ensure a better future for our state. And in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, may we rededicate ourselves to his legacy by continuing to fight for a third Reconstruction and help create the beloved community for all of our people. We will see you in DC on June 18th, 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That's right. And good morning, everyone. Forward together, not one step back. We're excited to be here this morning for this rolling vigil for voting rights. We are from across the country, have dozens of activists and leaders and folks who have been on the front lines of the fight for democracy here this morning. We are thrilled to go to the great state of Maine next, starting with the Reverend Dr. Jody Hayashida and followed by Josh Kapila. Come on, Reverend Jody.
Everyone, I'm Reverend Jody Cohen Hayashida. I'm calling in from Auburn, Maine, where I have lived and served my small congregation since the summer of 2000. The first principle of my faith tradition is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. That first principle gives birth to our fifth principle, which includes the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. Because every person is inherently sacred, our faith teaches us every person's voice matters, which means that blatant attempts at voter suppression are not just the denial of people's voices and the denial of people's rights, they are the denial of people's sacredness, a denial of their inherent worth and full humanity. I have had conversation after conversation here in the sister cities of Lewiston and Auburn with people who have not bothered to vote in the past. It isn't about partisan politics. Neither party has listened to their needs or experiences, and neither party governs as if their lives are sacred. In the 2016 election, 140,000 low-income eligible voters didn't vote here in Maine. In the 2018 midterm election, 150,000 low-income eligible voters didn't vote. But as we have been mobilizing and organizing, claiming our voices and our power, it has become clear, I think, to the power hoarders in Congress that they can no longer rely on people to silence themselves. And they know how powerful we will be if we weave ourselves into community. And we see that they are afraid. So now, the fear of those who were elected to be representatives of the people have made them even more brazen in their attempts to silence and deny the full humanity of the same people they are supposed to represent. But what we see is that what makes them afraid makes us courageous, right? And even more committed. So I know that within this movement, we are going to keep finding our way towards one another. We are going to keep lifting up our voices. We are going to affirm the sacredness of every single one of us and continue to grow our power. Forward together.
One step back. Thank you, Reverend Jody. Josh.
Hi, my name is Josh Kelpel. I'm with the Poor People's Campaign here in Bangor, Maine. I use they, them pronouns. And every election in my memory has been affected by voter suppression, from the 2000 presidential election through various disastrous Supreme Court decisions like Citizens United and Shelby versus Holder, and the recent avalanche of bills introduced after the last election. I know that my interests and the interests of the 454,000 poor and low wealth folks here in Maine and the 140 million plus across the nation keep getting shut out of the political debate because broadly popular and helpful policies get scrapped or negotiated away for political expediency, as if the votes and the values expressed were meaningless. I am sick of politicians talking big on the trail and acting small in the office, because we are hurting. The cost of rent, utilities, food, healthcare towering over minuscule wages and benefits. In a fugue state, just an emergency or two away from homelessness. That ain't right. The priorities of the representatives aren't representing what we need to survive and thrive. Senator Collins, Senator King, poor people are making tough decisions every day. We deserve a say in the policies that will either further impoverish or improve our lives. We are demanding that Congress support and protect voting rights. We as a state and a nation have a lot to figure out. Like, how do we protect our drinking water and environment? How do we face the unfolding climate chaos, which is fueled by racism, militarism, and greed? How do we keep everyone safe during this public health emergency? The full dream of democracy has yet to be fulfilled in this country, and we need to face these challenges with as many voices present as possible. To that end, I will be organizing towards a mass low-wage workers' assembly and moral march in Washington, D.C. this June 18th, because somebody's been hurting our family, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
Amen, Josh. Thank you. Thank you, Maine, for holding it down, the anchor of the Northeast. We're going to move just down the road to New Jersey. And Brother Mark Lesko, if you could come forward now.
Hi, I'm Mark Lesko from Highland Park, New Jersey. We're talking about voting rights. Interesting, because in the United States, voting has not been treated as a right. It's been treated as a privilege historically. And in a time where we should be going in the opposite direction, we still have gerrymandering. We're still taking away, a lot of states are taking away polling places and making it more difficult for people to vote. We've talked about people of color, women were formerly not allowed to vote. They're discouraging low-income people from being allowed to vote. And in my opinion, every citizen of the United States should be able to vote, no exceptions. I also think the voter age should be lowered because the youth are sort of spearheading a lot of our projects at this point. But that's my opinion. And one topic that almost no one discusses is accessibility to voting for disabled individuals, not just people in wheelchairs per se who have physical disabilities, but also the blind and people who can't read voting machines or mail-in ballots, people with anxiety and other mental illnesses who might have a hard time figuring out voting or figuring out what to do. They need support. And there doesn't seem to be, there should be a national support system for anyone with any disability to be able to have accessibility to voting. So every citizen should be able to vote. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But we need to really push to make it so everyone can vote and there is no voter suppression. Also, ballots, mail-in ballots not being counted sometimes. They found stores of mail-in ballots that weren't counted. And there's no reason for it not to happen except that the politicians fear that if the people voted, the people would have a say and we would be able to run our own government as it was designed to be. So forward together, not one step back.
One step back. Thank you. Let's go. Thank you for bringing in from New Jersey. Now we're moving to the middle of our country for Illinois. We're going to hear from Shauna East and then Reverend Dr. Larita Rice Barnes. Please come now.
Good morning, fellow freedom fighters. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm so happy to be with you today. My name's Shauna East. I'm a member of the Illinois Poor People's Campaign Coordinating Committee. I'm here to talk today about what happens when democracy is subverted, whether it be through voter suppression, lack of accessibility to the vote, or voter disenfranchisement. Here's the injection I need to take once a week in order to stay alive. This one injection costs $2,500. That turns out to be $130,000 per year for one medicine. Let that sink in. $130,000 per year for one medicine, not for rent or for mortgage, your electric bill, gas bill, groceries, none of that. Just one medicine. This little piece of plastic with a few drops of liquid in it. I want everyone to think for a moment about whether there's anyone, no matter how much money they make in your life, who could afford to pay $130,000 per year for a single prescription, because I don't know anyone who could. Now, I went to college. I was the first person in my family to earn a college degree. I recently bought my first home. I'm the first person in my entire family to own a home. I work 2 jobs. I take care of my dad, people around me. I have full benefits through my employer. This is the American dream, right? Yet I would have to earn over 2 to 3 times what I currently earn working 2 jobs a year for this one medicine. How can something like this be possible in the richest country in the world? It's possible because our representatives represent their corporate donors, including Big Pharma, and not the people. They do this by making sure we can't organize, we can't rise up, and we can't vote. There has been immense public outcry for lower drug prices, no matter what someone's party is. But our lawmakers have allowed this market to go completely unchecked. And as a result, each month I have to contact the pharmaceutical company that manufactures the injection to beg them to add money to my coupon card so I can live. I have to rely on the good graces of the very corporation pouring their money into our electoral process, the corporation doing the price gouging to help me out for just one more month. And I don't think there is and please don't think there's one bad party and one good party on the issue of voting rights. I live in a blue state, Illinois, that has some of the most gerrymandered districts in the country. In 2020, I served on the DNC Rules Committee, and I proposed a resolution to the Democratic Party charter that would have made primary elections more democratic, that would have expanded accessibility and mail-in voting. It was soundly defeated by Democrats with a vote of 147 noes to only 18 yes. This was a vote on expanding mail-in voting during a pandemic, mind you.
Wow.
Those in power will always twist the rules to benefit themselves unless we hold them, all of them, accountable. We need to pass voting rights now, the people's voting rights agenda, not the agenda of one party or another, because our lives literally depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. Yeah, Reverend Loretta Rice Barnes.
Yes, thank you. My name is Reverend Dr. Loretta Rice Barnes, and I'm right here in the state of Illinois. I'm the pastor of Empowerment of Grace. I am the executive director of Metro East Organizing Coalition, and I am the regional lead for the Southern Illinois Metro East Poor People's Campaign. Right now in our state, redistricting is happening that redistricts Black and Brown voters from having the ability to vote powerfully and to vote in individuals that look like them. And that ain't right. Legislators must abandon laws that seek to undermine the ability of poor and low-income folks to exercise their right to vote. We must protect voting rights and prohibit racist gerrymandering, hiring policy and sentencing policies that exacerbate inequalities for Black and Brown people. Everybody's got a right to vote. Voting rights protections in many states are weaker now than they were 50 years ago, and it does not have to be that way. Last year in Georgia, we walked the streets encouraging voters to get out the vote, and they did. Since then, there have been at least 400 voter suppression measures introduced in almost every state house in 2021 to undo the hard and egregious work that was done. Our voting infrastructure must be expanded, not restricted, to encourage voters to continue to both register and to vote. And while registration is important, there is an even greater need for policies and legislation that increase the ability to cast a ballot and actually vote. We need automatic voter registration in multiple locations. We need legislation that provides same-day registration. We need no excuse mail-in voting, early voting, more polling stations, and extended and longer voting hours. is critical to turn the opportunity to vote into a reality. Why? Because everybody, every single person has a right to vote. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Rice Barnes. All right, as we keep on moving, we're actually going to be heading back to New Jersey, and we have an amazing turnout here today of speakers from across the country, all of the different states. We are asking folks to keep your remarks sharp and to the point, so that we can get to everyone and we can get those powerful snapshots of what you have to say. So, Brother Kevin Pierre from New Jersey, if you would come now.
Thanks for doubling back to New Jersey. Everybody loves to come back. I'm going to try and make this short and sweet, and make it some more national points than New Jersey points. But as a nation, we kind of know as activists that we rank #1 in what we spend in military budget. But even if we rank #1, we rank #4 nation, global wise, in poverty. If we look at the criminal justice system, if you're a minority, you're 6 times more likely to be incarcerated. We spend as a nation over $81 billion on our military budget. And we spend half of that on renewable resources as we watch the globe melt. Voter turnout during the last election was 55.7%. That's the highest turnout I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's because we made a system where we said, look, let's try to get as many people as we can to vote. And we were fired up, we were hungry, and we wanted to see some change. And people showed up. More than half of everybody that was registered to vote showed up. And after that, now we're starting to see more gerrymandering. We're starting to see more restrictions. We're starting to see states try to mitigate people's right to vote. And that goes against particular individuals' fight, which I very much respect historically, John Lewis. John Lewis, as a civilian, put himself on the line and put his life on the line and made himself into a symbol nationwide to make sure that we were put on a path to equality for a right to vote. And that bill in 1965 is still being fought for today. So if we're still fighting for that bill today, have we ever really had full access to the right to vote? We have to fight for it tooth and nail every single year, every single election. And we are coming up to the midterms right now. And I'm not going to start going after certain politicians. We got 2 people really holding back the wheels of justice right now and moving forward with a 60-40 instead of a 50-50, 50+1. And if that's the way we're going to start grinding down the wheels of democracy, then how much more fighting do we have to do to reach equality?
That's right, Brother Kevin. We appreciate it.
That's a lot of fighting we got to do.
We got to do a lot of fighting. Thank you, Brother Kevin. We're going to have to keep on moving through the states to get through, but we appreciate you and fighting in New Jersey. And we're going to bring up now from the state of New York, Brother Jamel Coy Hudson. Jamel, are you here with us?
I am, sir. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you and God's mercy and blessings, members of this beloved community. My name is Jamel Coy Hudson. I'm a tri-chair of the New York State Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival, and members of the New York State Coordinating Committee, members of the New York State PPC, and poor people across the state of New York demand Congress does more. Congress must pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, must pass Build Back Better, and end this coward filibuster, and do more to protect voting rights and economic justice for its citizens. 45% of people in New York are poor or low income. It's a total of 8.6 million residents. And the COVID-19 pandemic continues to cause us all to live in fear of job loss, sickness, death. And it's time out for playing games. Too many lies have been told, lies about election integrity. Just tell the truth. Congress must do more. New Yorkers are calling on our elected officials, Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand. Which side are you on? Because the New York State PPC is on the freedom side, and we're going to continue to resist injustice and organize and struggle and build and teach and vote. And you will see New York, inshallah, June 18th, marching on Washington and to the polls to make the declaration to this nation that we are more than a moment. We are a movement, and our deadline is victory. Forward together, not one step back. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thank you, Jamel. Not one step back. I'm going to bring on a longtime freedom fighter in New York with the PPC, Reverend Wes Mcneil. Please come now.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Wes Mcneil. I use the pronouns they, them, and I'm joining you all from Schenectady, New York, where I am also a tri-chair of the New York State Poor People's Campaign. New York has this reputation for being progressive, but in fact, our state has lagged behind in making voting accessible. Until 2020, we had no early voting at all, no online voter registration, and a notoriously confusing primary process that drove down turnout. We still don't have same-day registration. We still don't have no excuse absentee voting. And there are tens of thousands of New Yorkers who are incarcerated or on parole who are denied the right to vote. And we've had to fight both parties in our state to expand access to voting because politicians on both sides know that the ballot box is a tool that we can wield to force our agenda and take away their power. And we can't let that tool be stolen from us. We cannot and will not let extremists subvert election results and take away our right to vote. We won't let President Biden or my senator, Majority Leader Schumer, hide behind Senators Manchin and Sinema or make excuses for why they can't do what they were elected to do. Monday is their deadline, not ours, and we demand that they do more and push harder because the stakes are just too high. As a member of the queer and trans community, I know that our rights and well-being are under threat. Anti-trans legislation is at the top of the agenda when extremists take power, and the rhetoric they use is increasing vigilante violence against us, especially Black trans women and other queer and trans people of color. As a parent, I know that the attack on voting rights and our democracy is an attack on our children's futures. And as a faith leader and a member of this moral fusion movement, I know that this tool of voting is a critical one to be able to achieve our whole agenda, to lift from the bottom so that everybody rises and everybody has a right to live. And so we have to keep fighting and we will keep fighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend West. Thank you so much from New York. We're now going to Ohio to Julie Boatger and then Monica Hamrick. And you will charge my mind and not my heart if I don't have your name right, but we'll get it right soon.
Hey, Rob, how you doing?
Hey, Bishop, welcome back.
Great. I'm watching. People are texting me from all over the country. I want to make sure those two that they're calling these names is bring your energy up just a little bit. Because we got the most powerful people in the world, the folk that are speaking this morning. And one want to take 1 second. Can you bring that video back up, the promo? I've got people want to see it. They're called texts from around the country. And if you would bring it up, we're going to take just a breather here. And also, while we are on, we need you all to be sending it out. If you got, if you can do 100 people on your email, send it out to 100 people right now. If you can do 10 people on your phone, send it out and then ask them to send it to 10, send them to 10. That's how you build movement. That's how you build movement. Pop that in real quick, the promo.
We welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022. We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful.
To demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together,
when we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third Reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
Together, we can change the world until the poor are lifted, the workers are paid, the sick are healed, the vote is not suppressed, police killing is stopped, land and water is not poisoned, war is not pushed, promoted and promulgated, humanity is respected, children are protected, civil rights, labor rights, human rights are never neglected until these things are actualized. We've got work to do, and if we do it together, if the rejected work together, generations yet unborn will rise up and remember us for the work we did, and together we will change the nation.
I know justice is coming soon.
Do you believe that I'm today?
America, if you're hearing this vigil, if you're seeing the promos, if you were at the press conference, you're getting just a taste of what you're going to see on June 18th, and the real moral authority and voices that you're going to hear. And did you all hear that? The Reconstruction doesn't get, when we beg the government to help us, we're trying to save the country for them too. They don't even know it yet. But when we write the plan, it's when we decide and get that attitude, you have to get your foot off of my neck. I just can't take this anymore now. I'm not, and because there's a point that when somebody puts their foot on your neck, it's their fault. But if we let it stay there so long without rising up, then it becomes our fault. After a long train of abuses, it is the duty of the people to throw off such government whenever that government is not doing life, liberty, and the pursuit. And it ain't about insurrection. Throwing off, from our perspective, it's not about that. It is about transformation and reconstruction rooted in love, justice, truth, and peace. This is the moral voice. This is the authority. And faith comes by hearing, Casimir, right? And hearing by the word of God. And we know that the power of life and death is in the tongue. But let folk know that when we laugh, we laugh on our own terms. We don't laugh when ain't nothing funny. And we don't scratch when we don't have an itch. And we don't bow when we're not trying to pick nothing up. And we do not cry when you tell us to cry, we are our own people, and we are serious about the transformation of this nation. I'm gonna let y'all take it from here.
Hi, I'm Danielle Holmes, National Organizer with Repairs of the Breach and Poor People's Campaign. As we move this powerful prayer vigil along, we beseech our Congress by the mercies of the living God that they will hear the voices of the 104 million poor and low wealth across this country. Next up, we will have Julie Boecker and Monica Hamrick from Ohio.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us all here today. My name is Julie, and I'm one of the tri-chairs for the Ohio Poor People's Campaign. I come to you today from rural Ashtabula, the largest county in Ohio, with a decline in population in the last 10 years of 4.79%, almost 5%. Our governor claims Ohio is progressive. Ohio is not a progressive state or a welcoming state for Black or brown people, females, LGBTQ folks, or people who want clean air and water. And we're currently fighting our gerrymandered maps with 3 lawsuits. But on January 12th, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that the state legislative maps be overturned as unconstitutional. And just yesterday, our state congressional maps were struck down as unconstitutional. But even with these rulings, Ohioans still have to fight the Ohio legislature over extreme bills like HB 387, which if passed includes a whole host of extreme provisions and that will take Ohio backwards. These power plays have been going on for years in Ohio, making it more and more difficult for folks to vote. We need voting by mail, the use of drop boxes and in-person early voting, and many other provisions to make it more accessible for everyone to vote and for everyone's voice to be heard. In 2020, 36% of Ohio voters cast their vote ballots by mail or used secure drop boxes, and nearly 23% voted in person before Election Day. Now, prosperity and justice go hand in hand rather than being in opposition to one another. We need to end the filibuster, pass the Voting Rights Advancement Act, and pass the For the People's Act. Our deadline is victory. Forward together, not one step back.
My goodness, let me interrupt here just a second, Danielle. Can somebody clip that for me and send that to me in a video? Let me tell you, that's that. You just framed, Julie. I bet you y'all were told you weren't gonna win. You couldn't win. Then you wanted the state. But then you said that didn't end our battle. Y'all are not jumping up, running around saying, oh, we can go home and sit down. You've got other pieces, and the framing of how the battles that are still yet ahead, that is part, and this is what I'm hearing, and people are telling me all over the country, you all are the most powerful, and we've been trying to tell the president, and then he should have a long time ago. We asked him, we begged him, I want y'all to know, to meet with a group of people from the campaign and moral leaders, and then to turn the mic over to you. We begged his handlers ever since January, and they still haven't done it. And we're working on that, but we're not going to not speak just because they don't do it. But this is the kind of speech and voice and power that could shift the whole debate. So y'all just don't even worry about whether or not what's going to happen Monday or Tuesday. Even if they win, we got a lot of work to do, even if those bills come out. But if they don't, our deadline is victory, and we got work to do, and we're going to reshape this market nation. And Danielle, lastly, as you came on, I felt anointed just a little bit because you went and grabbed beseeched. And nobody talk like that unless they've been in the Bible. So since you got beseech on your mind, as you are guiding the rest of this morning, if you want to say a prayer, just jump right in there and pray over this vigil in the way in which God has anointed you to do. And if we have somebody from another tradition, we got a Jewish person on later, or a Unitarian, we can have somebody do the same thing toward the end. God bless you all.
Bless you, Bishop. Monica, you're up next.
Good morning. Thank you for giving us a platform to speak today and be heard. which we aren't getting from our representatives in Ohio. They're doing their best to ignore us. My name is Monica Hamrick, and I won't be silent. I live in Butler County, Ohio, where over 900 people have died of COVID-19. The ballot box is supposed to be a place where all Americans are equal, one person, one vote. And that hasn't been happening in Ohio. You know by now that the Ohio Supreme Court rejected the most recent gerrymandered legislative map. In 2018, 74% of voters in Ohio approved an amendment to the state constitution to build in transparency and bipartisanship in the redistricting process. This fall, public hearings were held to gather input as was written in the amendment. And even though the public hearings were announced at the last minute, did not allow for online participation during a pandemic and took place midday during the week, rooms all over the state were overflowing with people who felt strongly about ensuring fair maps to keep our community's interest intact. Elected politicians ignored their constituents, they ignored the public submissions, and they ignored the Ohio Constitution to try and weasel their gerrymandered map through once again. Considering how good they are at exploiting the loopholes they put in the very process they are responsible for safekeeping, we can't expect them to do the right thing no matter how many second chances they get. Over 3 million poor and low wealth voters in Ohio can't afford to be silent. In fact, a number of bills have been brought to our state house that would limit access to early voting, absentee ballots, and ballot drop boxes, all of which are vital for working folks and our friends and families with mobility issues and immunocompromised conditions. Our representatives are supposed to be representing us, and yet they are purposefully ignoring the will of the people. It's not right. It's unconstitutional. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Monica. Next, we'll have Carl Lathan, Delaware.
Good morning from the first state of Delaware. I'm Carl Lathan, a member of the Delaware Poor People's Campaign Coordinating Committee. It's good to join you today, but at the same time, I'm appalled and disgusted that 57 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, we're reliving the same voting rights, civil rights, and economic justice issues our elders dealt with. It's incredible. It's unbelievable we're still fighting the same battles. Economic rights or civil rights, and they go hand in hand with voting rights. In Delaware, months after the devastating Hurricane Ida floods, we still have people, adults and children who lost everything, sleeping in cars or having to stay in roach-infested hotels. People whose mental health has been impacted are not getting help. We have public officials who are tone deaf to the cries of people in need. This is just one example of the issues Delawareans face. People are being treated like things, animals. It's got to stop. The Poor People's Campaign is working to bring these public officials face to face with these impacted people and their issues. In Delaware, we're working to ensure easy access to the ballot box for low-income voters. We want no excuse access to absentee ballots. We want those incarcerated and formerly incarcerated to be allowed to vote and to be educated so they can vote. Time off from work so people can vote. We stand with our Poor People's Campaign colleagues in demanding that the federal legislatures pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Enough is enough. The voters are right. Policies, laws, and ineffective lawmakers are making it difficult for us to live our best lives. They need to be changed, and we won't stop until they are. If we come out, we can throw them out. Our right to vote is crucial. Each of us deserves to have our voices heard through the vote. Forward together, not one step back. Now to my colleague, D. Marquis Hall.
If we come out, we can throw them out. I hear you.
We must decarcerate our voice. We must decarcerate our vote. This state is a carceral state. It is a state where we imprison far too many people for what we call crimes. A lot of times the crime is just living. The crime is just being present. The crime is being a human being. We need to do more to help the people that have been disenfranchised, that have been underserved, the people that we call at risk. I'm one of those people. I'm an impacted person. My mother was pregnant with me in jail. My name is D. Marquis Hall. The D stands for Devon. And in 2008, when Obama won, I was back in jail. I was in the hole. So I couldn't vote. I wasn't a part of that process in 2008. That would have been the first election that I could have voted in, but I wasn't able to because here in Delaware, we don't provide that privilege to people that are in jail. In Maine, in Washington, D.C., and in Vermont, they allow for people that are locked up behind bars to vote. That's something that we could do here in Delaware. It's something that we could allow with absentee voting. There are ballots that could be in prisons. This is what happens in states like Vermont, Maine, Washington, D.C. And that's something that we could have if we advocated for, if we demanded it. We could have same day registration where we could actually go and we don't have to worry about being registered already. We don't have to worry about deadlines a month before. But now we have all those different barriers that stop people from voting, including the barrier of not knowing. People aren't aware that they have the right, because when you're on probation, you still don't have the right to vote. Even if you get out of jail and you're doing the right thing, you're working, you're trying to take care of your family, you can't vote if you're on probation. They say that felons, people that are convicted for felonies, I don't like using that term felons, but people that have been convicted for felony charges cannot vote. People think that they can't still, because you don't get a packet when you get out of jail that says, yeah, you can vote now. There's no packet, there's no knowledge of that. Since 2016, when you get out of jail,
just a little bit, Devon, we get the time frame, because what you're saying
today,
is so
if you don't know, one more thing, Reverend Barber, today,
there you go.
It's Dr. King's birthday, and he would have been 93 today if he wasn't assassinated. And it's horrible that we still have all these different things that are stopping us from doing what it is that we should be able to do, that he fought for us to be able to do.
That phrase you said, brother, decarcerate, I'll vote, I'll never
decarcerate.
I'll never forget it as long as I'm living. Thank you for that. Danielle?
Yes, next we'll have Vivian Henry and T. Michael Rock, Minnesota.
Hi, my name is Vivian Henry, and I'm one of the tri-chairs of the Minnesota Poor People's Campaign. I'm part of the 140 million plus Americans who currently live in poverty and low wealth in America. This includes 33% of Minnesotans, approximately 1.8 million. This is almost half of this nation lives in poverty or low wealth in the so-called greatest nation in the world. With restricted or no voting rights, I will not have the opportunity to fight back against unjust laws and policies, such as $203 state general assistance in Minnesota for single adults. Along with food stamps, who can live on $203 per month in 2022? That's more like 1902. At least 19 states have enacted laws to restrict voting rights. This is a power grab in our democracy in favor of fascist authoritarian rule, which would affect everyone, well, except for the top 1% and the wealthy. The original Poor People's Campaign started in 1968 by Martin Luther King Jr. to fight back against the three evils in society: poverty, racism, and militarism, all of which are tied to voting rights. Today would have been his Martin Luther King Jr.'s 93rd birthday. The fierce urgency of now in 2022 is to non-violently fight back to protect our right to vote, not just for African Americans, but for every American. Our democracy is on the verge. Oops.
We welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March.
Our democracy is on the verge of permanently ending It's up to every American to take nonviolent action to save it.
Let's give us a second. We'll get the technology.
I've learned the past 5 years that democracy isn't a spectator sport. Along with the poor.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. We'll give somebody the technology. You didn't click anything. All right, team. I need the tech folk talking to us. Is something going on?
Not that I can't see who it is.
Let's check around and see what's going on. Make sure you didn't hit anything on your computer.
Will to do what's right.
That's just a little glitch.
Back to you, Miss Vivian.
What?
Somewhere on your computer.
Coming from you.
It's coming from your computer, Miss Vivian.
Is it me?
Yes, ma'am.
People with disabilities are the fastest.
That's all right, though. It's just that things happen.
Oh, sorry.
Do you have another window
Sorry,
open?
everyone.
Yeah. Let me say this. Let me stop right there because we gotta move to that. But let me say something because there's a lesson in that. When that started happening, and she continued to talk, I jumped in and said, no, we stop and we figure out what's going on. Tech team, that's what we do. We get on and we say, hold on, let's figure this out. Because that's the problem in America. They just keep they're going. They don't stop. And they don't stop. They keep saying the same thing. So we model everything. We ought to get on nerves. Things are going to happen. And so we stop. Somebody says, hold on. We contact, we figure it out either on our end or on the other end. Your message was extraordinarily powerful this morning, Ms. Vivian. We thank you for all we see you too got right behind you, rise up for the third reconstruction. Did you have one sentence you wanted to conclude with?
Along with the poor people's campaign, I'll continue to fight as I want to keep my rights and freedoms in the USA. This includes the right to nonviolently protest against unjust laws and policies. In 2021, the Poor People's Campaign gave me the tremendous opportunity to protest and march in Washington, D.C. This included getting arrested 2 times in the fight to save our democracy. Which side are you on, democracy or autocracy? Choose wisely.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I do want to say this and drop it in, and I really am this time. As we are talking today, we are remembering that Martin King's birthday is today. But I want you also to know that it was, and we need to say this every time we're talking, because we want to go against popular history. It was the welfare rights women that went to Dr. King, women fighting poverty, and said to him, we need to do a Poor People's Campaign. Also, part of what was going on with the campaign was to finish what had started in '63, but some organizations had blocked it. So March on Washington had an economic agenda, and it was supposed to be more focused and critical. And they were even supposed to be mass nonviolent civil disobedience. You also had Cesar Chavez, and there's a whole group. We'll send that to you all. But we have to always remember that, because the popular history, even today, they want to make it as though it was one great person or one person, when in fact, it was a movement that poor and low wealth people called for themselves and had been working for in themselves. So we want to mention that as we are laying out this history and teaching the nation and pushing forward. Thank you so much. We're going to continue now to go on with the rest of our people.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. This is T. Michael Rock from Minnesota. I'm one of the people on the coordinating committee here, and I'm so energized by all of your experience today and all the different things that are happening around the country. Here in Minnesota, this is Dakota land. This is an Anishinaabe land. This is land that has long been used and abused by white settlers. And so here we are in the midst of this solidarity movement, deeply listening to all the needs and of the folks around the country, around the world. Minnesota is often lifted up as the most aggressive voting rights state in the country. We have more people that vote in Minnesota percentage wise than any other state in the union. We've been doing that for the last 40, 50 years. However, that's mostly the white folks. Poor immigrant and indigenous people do not get a chance to get to the ballot box in the same way. Folks who are working more jobs and not able to make that happen. We can do better. We can always do better. We are in a movement together to move forward and not one step back. Move forward and not one step back, because everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to vote. We are in this together.
Amen. Amen.
All right, next up we have Nijmi, Zarenko, and Michael Pollock from Pennsylvania.
Danielle, we have you on here twice. You got to back. So yeah. There you go.
Okay, greetings everyone. Wonderful to be here with you today. My name is Nijmi Zakia Zarenko. I'm a tri-chair from Clearfield, Pennsylvania. I use she or they pronouns. I'm a Black and Indigenous woman, member of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation out of North Carolina. I want to bring you greetings from the Pennsylvania Coordinating Committee. It's so wonderful to be here with you today. Everyone here has laid out the problem so well and our demands so well. As we lift up Dr. King and the welfare rights movement, I want to quote King when he said, "There are millions of poor people in this country with little or nothing to lose. If they can be helped to take action together, they will do so with a freedom and a power that will be a new and unsettling force in our complacent national life." We are that new and unsettling force. We are that sleeping giant. With the struggles coming up ahead of us, I want to remind us of what we have accomplished. In 2020, voters turned out at the highest level in 100 years. We were part of that. All of you here were an important part of that. And I'm very proud of the work that we did with the PA Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. We trained hundreds of poll monitors and we contacted over 300,000 poor and low-income voters. There were over 3 million poor and low-income voters in PA, accounting for over 34% of the total votes in the state. White low-income voters accounted for over 27% of the total votes in the state. Black low-income voters accounted for 4.5%, and Hispanic voters another 1.3%. It's nice to have facts and statistics. It's nice to have a handle on the problem, but we also have to focus on building the clarity, commitment, competence, and connectedness of the 140 million poor and low-income people in this country. Pulling from the Waking the Sleeping Giant report, the composition of low-income voters in the battleground states suggests that multiracial political coalitions, including white, Black, and Hispanic low-income voters, are necessary to organize this vast segment of the electorate. We must organize, organize, organize. If we organize a mass, politically independent force of poor and dispossessed people in every county, every city, small town, suburb, and rural area across this country, if we build this base of 140 million people, bringing them into the Poor People's Campaign and the organizations of the campaign, we can not only impact elections, but we can change what is politically possible in this country. And everything that everyone is saying here today makes clear why it is necessary to do that. And finally, I want to say that 11 million Americans currently have no pathway to citizenship, so are also denied a pathway to any voting rights now or ever in the future. This is why there must be a pathway to citizenship for all Americans who are disenfranchised, despite producing immense wealth for American industries and corporations. We are a sleeping giant, and we are waking up. This Congress is hurting our people, and we won't be silent anymore. See you all on June 18th.
Powerful.
Mark Pollock,
Hello, everybody.
Pennsylvania.
Shabbat Shalom. I am Rabbi Michael Pollock from Philadelphia. Nijmi, it's always great to hear you, and I'm looking forward to visiting out in Clearfield soon. Miss you in Philly. About 1700 years ago, the rabbis of the Talmud told a story about Alexander the Great. I'd like to tell you that story this morning. Alexander the Great once sat by a stream, and a very pleasant smell overwhelmed him, and he followed that smell up the stream until he arrived at the gates of the Garden of Eden. And he demanded at the gates of Eden that he be let in. But the guardians of Eden said, "This is the gate of God, only the righteous may enter, and you are not righteous." Alexander said, "At least give me something so I can show people that I was here." And an eyeball was given to Alexander, and he took the eyeball and he put it on a scale to weigh it. And on the other side of the scale, he put gold, and he put the eyeball on the other side, and the eyeball was heavier. So he added more gold to the other side of the scale, and more silver and more jewels, but the eyeball was still heavier. And so he went to the rabbis and he said, "What does this mean?" And they told him, "Your eye is never satisfied, no matter how much you take. As it says in Proverbs chapter 27, death and destruction are never satisfied." Our endless greed for gold and power keeps us out of Eden. Our hunger for power must give way to voting rights and democracy, because the path to paradise is not greed and violence, it is love and democracy. In Pennsylvania, we have a 23-point money out, people in state level policy platform that would create a democracy in Pennsylvania. And if this federal voting rights bill passes, it would check off about 6 policies from our state platform. Because we need a federal intervention. We need federal action to get automatic voter registration, same-day registration, early voting, exposure of dark money, the expansion and strengthening of vote by mail, and independent redistricting in Pennsylvania. Our gerrymandering problem in PA is so bad and expansive that in 9 days, our legislature is going to try to gerrymander our state Supreme Court. They're not just gerrymandering the legislative branch, they're going after the judicial branch. I actually just got back from DC. I was there with the hunger striking kids from Arizona. And as the senator from Arizona walked into the Senate on Thursday, she scowled at us. She scowled at us because how dare we challenge corrupted power? And I'm not proud of what I did in reaction, but what I did was I turned and frankly, I farted in her general direction. And it did not smell like Eden. Not proud of this. But despite the courage and the bravery of all the hunger strikers that were there and everybody across the country who's been pushing this bill forward, we do not yet have the movement we need to win, but we're getting there and we will get there. We need to keep building the movement. We need to keep organizing and developing leaders and fighting our way past the greed and the violence and the corruption of the cinemas and the mansions and the too many others that stand in the way of our pathway toward Eden. We need to move forward toward the paradise that we know we can build together. Forward together, and see you all on June 18th.
Thank you. And as you all know, we're on a prayer vigil, so it's only right that we invoke the Spirit of the living God to make sure that we are our demands and our commands and our declarations are being heard. And so I just want to say a quick little prayer before we move on. In the name of our holy God, the one and true living God, we command the deep wells within us to be unblocked and break forth. The storm of the Lord shall pursue and overtake powers conspiring for our voting rights, for our living wages, and for everything that pertains to the 104 million poor and low wealth across this country. From now on, all of our enemies will start to fight themselves. We decree confusion into the camp of our enemies, and we declare victory for the 104 million poor and low wealth across this country. Pamela Walker Dawson and Gina Favors from Michigan.
Good afternoon. This is Pamela Walker Dawson. I am on the coordinating cabinet for Michigan Poor People's Campaign. Michigan got a step in justice for disallowing a frivolous lawsuit in December 2021. I have been an election official for the last 25 plus years. During this time, I have helped working 15 to 20 hours sometime during the election day. I help people. We help we just help people. I also am on the Detroit People's Platform Committee. And doing that, we do door knocking, we call our legislation, we text. Again, we do a door knocking. Education and organizing is very important. Together, forward together, now one step back. Thank you.
Gina Favors.
Hey everyone, I'm Gina Favors from the Poor People's Campaign here in Detroit, and I am also a United States Postal Service retiree. 2 years ago, postal workers played a critical role in the 2020 election, and it was carried out safely and securely via the mail. Even though Postmaster DeJoy tried to stop it, remove sorting machines and closed and slowed down delivery times, postal workers still came through and delivered for our country and for you. Excuse me. While here in Michigan, we passed no reason absentee voting and made it easier for folks to vote, we could be in danger now of losing that. So for the last 3 days, our union and joined with 57 other labor unions in calling in a call to action, calling senators to urge them to pass, excuse me, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Act. We know that while they are doing that, we can move on. So we're asking you, please call senators, urge them to pass these acts, because these two voting rights acts particularly can undo a lot of the voter suppression things that they have already started and move forward from there. So we're please asking you to please make those calls. I am in support. I thank you so much to the Poor People's Campaign for this opportunity.
Thank you, Gina. Next up, we'll have Reverend Ari Douglas and Brittany Raymer from Wisconsin.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Ari Douglas, they, them pronouns, Tri-Chair of the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign and pastor of FCC DOC of Janesville, Wisconsin. Often we speak of clergy and the poor fighting alongside one another for the rights of all. For those of us who of varied faiths, it in part comes from a desire to live into what our scriptures and sages have pressed upon us in how to live. Yet often we forget that many clergy people are themselves, or rather I should say ourselves, struggling in poverty. My mother, an ordained minister as well, and father, who was an associate professor of religious studies, struggled to put food on the table. The home that we lived in for several years of my childhood only had running water and working plumbing about half the time. And I have clear memories of walking into my room and the plaster and paint from the ceiling falling on top of me. Following nationwide cutbacks in education, my father made the difficult decision to move from teaching to pursuing a law degree and career in legal services. Our financial situation did not change drastically overnight. Through most of my childhood, I thought it was normal for kids to have to fight off cockroaches to play with their toys. While my mother continued to minister to the poor and elderly, my father would fight for their rights in the courtroom. I felt that call to ministry following my senior year of college, and as an ordained minister, I have experienced the challenges of being underpaid and overworked while risking homelessness and co-parenting a son with autism. Today, I minister a small church with people in poverty and struggle to meet ends meet myself. Janesville, Wisconsin, which is part of the dying Rust Belt, was hurt badly when General Motors moved out. Many people were pushed into poverty and many more had to move due to their jobs being lost. To add to this hurt and frustration on part of the people in Wisconsin, we have seen some of the worst cases of gerrymandering in the United States. How else could the likes of Paul Ryan, Brian Stile, or Ron Johnson get elected in these areas? We must support every answer to fair redistricting and ways of giving a hand up, because we can't pull ourselves up by our bootstraps as long as corrupt politicians keep stealing our boots. For that reason, we must pass the Build Back Better plan, pass the For the People Act, pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Bill, and show up in DC in mass to demand our rights as people of faith, as low-income folk, as Americans. Come join us if you're low income. Come join us if you're a person of faith. Come join us if you're both. Come join us if you're none of the above, because this is about people power. Everybody in, nobody out.
My brother, I'm so glad that you mentioned today the For the People's Act and not the Freedom to Vote Act, because the For the People's Act is still legislation. The Steve Knight wrote something the other day and said all of us should be totally disgusted that you would take the bill that John Lewis wrote with others in his last breath and remove that and put the Freedom to Vote Act in, and then act like that's a better bill or that suffices what needs to happen. That is why we have to continue to push. And thank you for inviting all people to come, because it's not a day, it's a declaration. It's not a movement. What we're doing in June is to signal that from then forward, even up to then, we are intensifying our efforts, and we'll continue, because our deadline is victory. If we don't see it when we're living, we're gonna build the kind of movement that people can keep on when we're gone until they see it. But our deadline ultimately is victory. We don't do ceremonial politics. We do reconstruction political movements. There's a song we did, the guy did it up under the tent in 2020. What is it, Yara? No, it wasn't 2020. It was 2020.
When we lift from the bottom.
That is. Somebody say that one more time.
When we lift from the bottom,
lift from
everybody
the bottom.
rises.
Let's play that and lift from the bottom.
We have come to liberate you from all the ways that you hold us down. When you hurt me, you hurt you too. When you free me, you free yourself. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Yes? Would you sing that with me? Okay, I'll sing the line, you sing it back to me. We have come to liberate you from all the ways that you hold us down. When you hurt me, you hurt you too. When you free me, you free yourself. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Now you. Everybody rises, that's right. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. You. Poor folk are the first to suffer in this war economy. But I'm your daughter, I'm your mother. We're a chosen family. All together, when you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Woo! When you live from the bottom, everybody, ooh, sing it again. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises, that's right. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Hear this. We need air that's clean to breathe. We need water we can drink. You might say that we are weak, but we are stronger than you think. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Oh, when you live everybody rises. Okay. So now when I say we have come to liberate you, it's because liberation is not something they're giving to you. We do not march to the Capitol so that they will give us liberation. That is not how liberation works. When we say we are here to liberate you, we are saying that when they hurt us, when they hold people down, they too are wrapped up in this evil, and we are saying we are here to free you from it. That's the gospel, my friends. That is the gospel. So let's sing that again. And remember that next time you march to the Capitol, y'all, that we are not there asking for something from them, that we are going there to give something to them. Do you understand what I'm saying? So sing with me. We have come to liberate you, sing. From all that ways you hold me down. When you hurt me, you hurt you too. When you free me, you free yourself. You free yourself. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Yeah. Live from the bottom, everybody rises. One more again. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Oh, when you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Oh, when you live from the bottom, everybody rises. When you live from the bottom, everybody. Now just y'all, sing it out. Everybody. Yeah. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Keep it up, y'all. When you live from the bottom, everybody rise. Last two times now. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. All right, bring that message to them, y'all. Let's free some people. Peace.
Yes, that's one of my favorite movement songs. When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Next up, we'll have Amy Tai from Massachusetts.
Good morning, everyone. Daja Hao. My name is Amy Hao Gu Tai, or Dai Hao Gu in Mandarin Chinese, and I'm an immigrant, a settler, and a single mom. I grew up working with my family in Boston, Massachusetts, in our family print shop, and now live with my teenage son, my brother, and my mom in my childhood home. My greatest passion for almost all of my adult life has been fighting racism. Ever since I was a child, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in school, I was aware that the final words, "with justice and liberty for all," was a false promise. The USA is the most powerful nation on this planet, and yet so many forget that it was literally built by the exploitation of enslaved Africans and the poor who came as indentured servants. An enormous portion of this nation's wealth came from the cotton, tobacco, and timber industries, all of which were produced by the blood, sweat, and tears of Black and brown people, indigenous people, and the poorest laborers. But now look at the statistics today. The gap between rich and poor is growing because of the disenfranchisement of the very people who built this country. Voter suppression is simply a direct extension of the laws that have perpetuated white supremacy since 1865, when enslaved people were supposedly freed. But the U.S. could not continue to grow and thrive without free labor. So laws were passed so there would always be a class of people who would be forced to work for nothing or close to nothing. So did freedom actually happen after the Civil War ended? Anyone who knows anything about racism in this country knows that it did not. The wealthy plantation class from the days of slavery simply go by a different name. They hide behind corporate brand names and transnational trademarks. And today, too many of the politicians in Washington, who are the pawns of the wealthy, continue to pass these laws that suppress voters' rights. We know full well that they do so to keep us, the poor people, disabled people, Black and brown people, indigenous people, powerless and unable to have our say in changing the way we manage our country's budget. Our right to vote empowers us to make change. This is why voter suppression is the key issue of our time. We must fight for our right to vote in order to transform our society from the bottom up. Forward together, not one step back. Thank you.
Thank you. Brittany from Wisconsin.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Brittany Reamer. I'm a tri-chair for the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign. I live in Wausau, Wisconsin. I grew up in poverty, raised by an amazing single dad who I watched struggle every single day, trying to do what he thought was the right thing. I remember times when I felt frustrated, embarrassed, and angry at him because I thought he was just making the wrong choices, and I knew that it would be different for me. But once I hit 17 or 18, I started to realize that this was not the case at all, and that the hardships I watched my dad endure were not self-inflicted. Now at 35 years old, I have spent all of my adult life working low-wage jobs. From the ages of 18 to 26, I worked in the service and hospitality industries, where most tipped positions are paid a sub-minimum wage. For several years, I held 2 jobs working 70+ hours per week while going to school full-time, and still barely made enough to cover my basic needs, let alone any type of emergency. And that was just for one person. I can speak firsthand about the impossible task of making it to the ballot box when you have to be at one job by 7 a.m. and once your shift is done, go straight to the next for another 8 hours. In the small city where I currently live, most of the population experience similar barriers and more. Many people rely on our already inadequate public transit, yet the buses stop running at 6:30 p.m., a full hour and a half before polling places close. Additionally, the routes do not come even close to the only DMV in the area, making attaining a valid ID extremely difficult, disproportionately affecting poor, low-income, elderly, and disabled community members. This part of the state is also very rural, so the internet is overpriced, unreliable, and all too often unavailable, which creates chaos and confusion when polling places are moved and last-minute changes are made, like we saw happen across the country in 2020. Expanding voting access would ensure that more, not all, but more of the 2.1 million eligible low-income voters in Wisconsin would have their voices heard. And as Dr. King said, of the millions of poor and dispossessed in this country, if they can be helped to take action together, they will do so with a freedom and a power that will be a new, unsettling force in our complacent national life. Thank you.
Thank you, and Brittany. Next up, we will have Pamela Pornowski from Rhode Island.
Good morning. My name is Pamela Poniatowski from Rhode Island. I'm one of the tri-chairs of the Rhode Island Poor People's Campaign. Policies have been keeping us in poverty, and it is time for those in power to allocate funds not toward the top 10%, but towards the bottom 90%. It is time to change our policies through voting. The only way we can change this country for the better is if we, the people that are poor and low wealth, some working 3 jobs, have a voice. How can someone with 3 jobs fit into a pared-down voting schedule? Without voting rights, we will not have a voice, and we are aware that there are those that would prefer that we did not have a voice. As is seen by all of the voter suppression bills that have come out across this nation since the very secure election of 2020. There are 140 million of us living at or below the poverty line. Over 100,000 of us live in Rhode Island, which is home to only 1 million people. The poverty line for 2022 is $12,880 for one person for the year. $12,880. Think about what you can buy with that. Let me share with you what I can't get with that. I can't get an apartment. After working for 30 years, I became disabled and have been on a waiting list for housing since 2018, staying in friends' guest rooms. But what about those that do not have a guest room in which to stay? There are 2,000 people that have no place to live in Rhode Island, many of them still on the street during the freezing temperatures. Insufficient housing is a crisis in this country. A recent letter I received from one of the housing developments told me that I do not make enough money to qualify for the low-income housing. And they were talking about the extremely low-income housing. They actually have levels. We need policies that will lift people from the bottom because this trickle-down theory does not work. Between redistricting that is gerrymandered to keep certain political groups in power and making it difficult for people that are poor and low wealth to vote, we will only be hearing from those with money. And I guarantee that they do not understand our plight. All men were given the right to vote in 1870, and those of us that are women were given the right to vote in 1920. Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, all of the other people involved in SNCC and the civil rights movement sustained many injuries in years of nonviolent protest for our right to vote. They got them in 1965, and we lost many of them in 2013. And we are losing more each time a state passes a voter suppression bill. It is time to get those rights back. Voting rights to save our democracy, the Build Back Better bill to rebuild our human infrastructure. Senators, Mr. President, get it done. Rhode Island Poor People's Campaign will be organizing with the rest of the states to see you in Washington, June 18th, 2022. Please join us.
Thank you, Pam, so much for those words. And you're right, trickle-down economics, one of the biggest lies we were ever told. Next up, please, Angela Montalvo and Margaret Marsh from Nebraska. You're up.
Hey, I am Angela Montalvo. I live in Ogallala, a town in rural western Nebraska, and I am one of the tri-chairs of the Nebraska Poor People's Campaign. Here in Nebraska, there's a proposed revision to the state constitution that would severely restrict Nebraska voters by adding lengthy and repetitive steps, as well as new technicalities that would disqualify eligible voters. The most notable goal of this constitutional revision is to enshrine voter ID requirements in our state constitution. If the proposed changes are made to the Nebraska Constitution, low-income Nebraskans, like myself, would struggle to vote. Obtaining a state ID can be very difficult for low-wage workers and poor people. Our DMV in the town I live in is only open 2 days a week, which makes it very difficult to access for many people who work every day. Being able to afford an ID is a barrier for low-income people. Dealing with the anxiety that comes with the process of getting an ID is a barrier to getting an ID for disabled folks like myself and my husband. Over 34,000 veterans have incomes below $35,000 in the state of Nebraska, including my husband and myself. That's a quarter of the Nebraska veteran population. 34% of people in Nebraska are poor or low income. This includes 47% of children in Nebraska, 39% of women in Nebraska, 64% of Black Americans, 63% of Latinx Nebraskans, and 30% of white Nebraskans. In 2020, we, the poor and low-income people of Nebraska, accounted for 36% of the total votes in Nebraska, over a third of the votes cast in our state. Low-income voters are a large, active part of the voting population, and we cannot allow barriers to be put in place to make it harder for us to vote. We must end the filibuster and save our democracy. Our deadline is a victory. Fight poverty, not the poor.
I'm Margaret Marsh. I'm a voting rights organizer in rural Nebraska. And I just want to follow up on a little bit that Angela has said. For the last decade, Nebraska has successfully fought off voter ID. And unfortunately, with this latest effort to put it on the ballot in Nebraska in November by a petition drive, which likely will succeed, we will see some of the tightest voter ID in the country, which is just really shocking, having worked on this issue for a while. Currently, our legislature, which is the only unicameral in the nation, is meeting, and there are 5 bills that concern making our elections less accessible. They would restrict third-party ballot collection and limit early voting. So I'm just really glad to be here today with all of you who are doing all of this important work. And we're just going to stand on notice that we will not tolerate this nonsense from the Senate anymore, because we all need protections and we need a Voting Rights Act now. So thank you. Thank you all for all the work you're doing.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Margaret. That's right. Fight poverty, not the poor. Please, Natalie and Eileen from Iowa.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm Natalie, she, her pronouns, here in Ames, Iowa, stolen land of the Sauk and Fox tribes. I'm a coordinating committee member for the Iowa PPC. There has been an assault on voting rights for more than a decade, with dozens of states, including my own, passing racist and ableist voter suppression laws. In August 2020, we were the last state in the nation to automatically restore voting rights to those convicted of felonies, but who completed their sentences. Folks who are incarcerated still do not have the right to vote. 2020 was also the second presidential election we've had without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And in 2021 alone, 19 states, including Iowa, passed more than 30 voter suppression laws that will impact up to 55 million eligible voters in those states. There's still more than 34,000 people in Iowa disenfranchised by voter suppression laws, 11% of whom are African American, which is astounding given the very small portion of African American folks living in the state of Iowa. We must fully restore and expand voting rights for all to save this democracy. As we've said on this broadcast many times, our deadline is victory. Forward together, not one step back.
That's right. Forward together, not one step back. Eileen Sambos.
Yes. Hi, my name is Eileen, and I am a tri-chair here in Ames, Iowa for the Poor People's Campaign. Everybody deserves the right to vote. Unfortunately, there are individuals that aren't being heard, but with their vote, they can be heard and make a difference. Each and every one of us deserves economic justice, and a lot of us aren't getting it. Without economic justice, how can there be freedom? When we all come together to build back better, we're fighting for justice and continuing what Martin Luther King Jr. started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Please, could we have Liz and Zilla from DC?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Liz Mcneil, one of the chairs of the DC Poor People's Campaign and a longtime resident of Washington, DC. I moved to DC 40 years ago, and like all DC residents, I have firsthand experience with being disenfranchised. Before I moved here, I lived in a number of states, and in every state, I had 2 senators and a representative who had a vote in Congress looking out for their state's interests, at least as they saw them. They didn't always do what I wanted, but I knew I could write or visit them or vote them out to have some influence on Congress. But now, as you know, despite living in the capital of the nation and paying federal taxes like everyone else, residents of the District of Columbia like me have never had voting members of Congress. And to make matters even worse, in my time living here, I've watched as Congress has overruled the will of the people of DC on everything from gun regulations to healthcare to the minimum wage. It's just wrong that members of Congress from Utah, or Kentucky, or anywhere else can meddle in our local affairs. I know that the bills being considered today would not make DC a state, but they would set the country on a path towards a true democracy that must inevitably lead to statehood for the people of DC. I stand with my Poor People's Campaign family in states across the country in support of the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And I look forward to the day that the voices of all the people of the United States count equally without regard to income, race, ethnicity, or how well connected you are. Thank you. Forward together, not one step back.
Perfect. Yes, Liz, not one step back. Hello, everyone. My name is Zilla Wesley. Greetings. She, her pronouns. I am coming from you from the occupied territory of Washington, D.C., where my other co-chair Liz said it so eloquently. We do not have representation. We pay taxes, but we don't vote. Yet we have a congresswoman who can't do anything and a shadow senator who doesn't even get paid and just is there. But but that's a whole nother story. Even the shape of DC is rooted in the slave history of this United States. And today, I want to claim that the ancestors are smiling upon us. They are here and they are saying, and we are saying, as everyone is echoing from all over this country, that we are no longer afraid of our freedom. We are here today to claim our liberation. We are here today to manifest a transformation of our victory and our freedom for this country and for this world. And that's why it's time to pick a side, and all roads lead to Washington, D.C. I hope to see you there on June 18th, 2022, because we need to say that we are here and we want to not just live, but we want to thrive and not just survive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zilla. She's right. Well, we've been here for about 3 hours now, and for 3 hours we have been telling our stories and sharing our experiences from all across the country. And it has been so beautiful to see the real power that this movement and this organism has, because when we work together, there's nothing we can't do. So thank you. Thank you for that, Zilla. I'd like to invite Jasmine to come up now.
Good morning. My name is Jasmine Krotkov. I live in Nyhart, Montana, which has a population of about 35. Much of Montana is made up of small towns. Our whole state is like one smaller city with really, really long streets. Along those streets, we've got 283,857 low-income people registered to vote, and they accounted for 38% of total votes cast in the last election. There are 7 Indian reservations in Montana, and rural reservations are the most isolated voter locations in Montana. The distance to travel to register and vote, limited mail routes, disproportionately high levels of poverty on reservations, and digital divide issues isolate Native Americans from participating in the political process. To overcome these barriers, many rely on same-day voter registration so they can make just one trip to the polling center to register and vote on the same day. Native Americans living on reservations disproportionately rely on same-day registration, especially voters on the Blackfeet Nation reservation in Northwest Montana. In our most recent legislative session, a number of bills passed into law that directly targeted the voting rights of Native Americans. 2 of those new laws, one to end same-day voter registration, and the other to block organized ballot collection on rural reservations, are now being challenged in court as unconstitutional. Other new laws make it harder for other low-income voters in Montana too. Now we need a photo ID to vote. And every year we have to return a postcard verifying that we still want to vote. Housing costs are skyrocketing here, so many people will be forced to move or into homelessness, which obviously makes it a lot harder to manage all the new paperwork required to vote. So with 38% of our voters being low income, these laws mean that the richest among us will get to decide which future policies become law. It seems like a never-ending cycle, but the Montana Poor People's Campaign is up to the challenge. The sleeping giant of low-income voters in Montana will surely wake up this June when we march on Washington. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for those powerful words. Please, could we have Megan Haygood from Washington?
Hi. Thank you for having me. My name is Megan Haygood, and I'm speaking to you from the Duwamish lands of the Coast Salish people, also known as Seattle, Washington, by way of Kansas City, Missouri. Growing up in Missouri, I am no stranger to the ways in which the suppressive arms of racial capitalism have gone to work to silence marginalized communities generation after generation. My hometown is the site where court-ordered desegregation was banned, and poor communities, at the whims of their legislators, were apportioned dismal resources for their schools simply because they were poor. These communities were in turn over-policed, neglected, and disenfranchised. Missouri continues to be a site of struggle for socioeconomic justice following the constitutional change requiring residents to present IDs to vote, effectively silencing countless community members who are undocumented. What does my hometown have to do with Seattle, Washington? On its face, not very much, some would say. However, on the other side of a consequential 2021 general election, it has become clear that Dr. King's words ring true. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Dr. King goes on to state that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. King County, where Seattle is located, has had mail-in voting for the last 10 years. Those with felonies can vote, and ID is not required to verify a ballot. However, only 46% of King County residents voted. We now have a mayor comprised of CEOs and a city attorney firm on prosecuting crimes of poverty in a city of massive wealth inequality. There is a massive need not to restore faith in the voting system, as our long history of fighting disenfranchisement shows. What is necessary at this time is to change the institution enough so that by virtue of its functioning, citizens of this country may feel connected to the power that is often extracted from them every day in the throes of our capitalist country. Voting is but one of many ways the working class may exercise their right to say what happens in their communities, their city, their state, and their country. We must empower the votes and the voters so that we are empowered in our communities. And in this garment of destiny, federal intervention on voter suppression is an agenda of absolute importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. And in the spirit of Dr. King, when we start asking why there are 140 million people in the United States that are living in poverty or low wealth, it's when we start to question the systems that have made it possible. And a lot of those systems have been created by people in power that we people have put in power and have elected who have not been doing right by their people. Thank you. And up next, could we please have Nell Myhand and Ishmael Herrera from California?
Good morning or afternoon. I'm Nell Myhand. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a 65-year-old disabled brown-skinned Black woman with a short afro. I'm on Ohlone land, which is also known as Oakland, California. And I bring you greetings from the California Poor People's Campaign. I also organized with the Global Women's Strike. And I'm here to tell you that we're building the campaign as our best chance to defend ourselves against those who would deny our voting rights, because voting is power. California has the 5th largest economy in the world, between the UK and Germany, $3 trillion. Yet 51%, 20 million Californians live at or near the poverty line. 62% of children, 54% of women, 61% of Black people, 72% of Latinx people, 38% of white people. And disabled people make up 12% of the population, but we're over half of people living in poverty. This points to the urgency of full voting rights, without which there is no democracy. The 1965 Voting Rights Act brought actual change that included increased Black employment in the public sector, anti-discrimination and affirmative action policies implemented at all levels of the government, and access to better education, health, and higher wages. The expansion of the child tax credit to include the poorest families after the 2020 election is a current example of the connection between voting rights and economic justice. The urgency of voter suppression is here in California too. We lost a congressional seat based on pandemic census count, and in San Luis Obispo County, our Central Coast region, Citizens for Good Government has filed a suit seeking to overturn the patent redistricting map that was unfairly made by their county supervisors. So that's why we're coming to Washington, D.C. for June 18, 2022 and beyond. Our numbers are growing and we will not be denied. We're turning our pain into people power and our outrage into organizing. Forward together and not one step back.
My name is Ismael Herrera, and I'm from the California campaign, he, him. And I am an immigrant from Mexico who came over, and this is a place where we know who the president is 6 years before they get elected. So coming here, I believe that it was a very hopeful nation. But as I grew up, I found out that there's a lot of problems. And what I have done is I have worked with the California campaign to make a better life for everybody, for the people that are poor. A few years back, I have 5 adult kids who do not have health insurance. And one of the things that we have done is hold the politicians accountable. We help getting them in office, and we held them accountable, and we made sure that they did a bill to get them sick leave. So in California, we have 5 days of sick leave, thanks to people mobilizing, to people uniting, to people voting. And as Nell said, voting is power. There's a lot of work to do, but I believe that we can do it. And like Cesar Chavez said, si se puede, forward together. Thank you.
Si se puede and forward together, not one step back. Thank you, Ishmael. All right, folks, we've got two more states, and then we'll conclude our vigil. Please, Lady Lawrence, and then our powerhouse team from Indiana, Crystal, Reverend Kim, Reverend Presley.
Hi, my name is Crystal Durrell. I'm one of the tri-chairs for the state of Indiana's Poor People's Campaign. Here in Indiana, we rise to protest the continuous passing of laws that uphold voter suppression. We are gravely disheartened that Indiana is one of a handful of states that persists in strict identification requirements that impedes the voting capacity of disenfranchised populations in our state, for whom acquiring such identification is not only hard, but also prohibitive. Our impacted siblings who are housing insecure, immigrants, and those who do not have the financial means to acquire IDs are disenfranchised. Those impacted siblings here in Indiana who are sick, COVID anxious, and otherwise unable to make their way to the polls should have ample opportunity to cast their ballots by mail without providing justification, because voting is a right that all of us should have.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm Reverend Kimberly Kozan, also with the Indiana Poor People's Campaign. And I'm here to say that although that we are the 38th largest state by land area, we are the 17th most populous state. However, we are the 15th poorest state in our nation.
And so the voices of our people need to be raised up, not suppressed. We've seen some positives of voter engagement of our low wealth voters showing up when accessibility changed. In Indiana, in 2020, for our primary elections, there was a no fault voting option so that people could have absentee ballots, and people showed up. That right was taken away by the general election, but the energy of the people persisted against odds of reducing the number of our polling places significantly. And we still had over 63% of our registered voters show up to the elections, the general elections, even though there were people who could not find a parking place within a mile of our voting centers, who had to wait in lines for a long time, especially in Marion County, where Indianapolis is located. Personally, as a vulnerable person with chronic health issues, my access to voting was increased by that 2020 primary. And I had concern about, how do I be a committed citizen who shows up and uses my voice and my power when we are in a pandemic, and we still are. We've seen that Ohio has been able to show up in a powerful way and use their legislative laws to make sure that gerrymandering does not persist. And so congratulations to our neighbors in Ohio who have made a difference and made sure that our numbers, our legislative districts, also represent who lives in them, and that 48% of the population is not ignored. We want to see more of that, not just in Indiana, but we want the insurance policy. We want to make sure there is nationwide voter laws that make it so that we all will have access. We had one bill that is currently in process in our state that may pass, would grant permanent absentee ballot status for elderly and disabled voters. This could be a step forward in Indiana, but as I said before, nationwide assurance is what we all need so that we can be engaged citizens. We know there's virtually no evidence of voter fraud, and so much to be gained by the investment of the people in our democracy, because when the people know their votes count, and trust me that we, the people, are not done until victory is won.
Amen. I'm Dr. J.B. Pressey. I'm with the Poor People's Campaign of Indiana, and it gives me a great pleasure to be on this platform. I was in Washington, D.C. with Dr. Barber and his awesome staff. Didn't go to jail, but we was there nevertheless, and this is giving Indiana an opportunity to voice our concerns. And I'm reminded what Dr. Martin Luther King once said. He said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matters the most. And today, voting, today, economic justice, today, the Poor People's Program to provide opportunities for our people nationwide, they matter to all of us. So we're here today to lend our voice to all the other voices around this country for freedom, justice, and equality. And as was said earlier, our victory is our deadline. And we would not stop, we would not step back until victory is won. I am so blessed to be here, and I would be very remiss to leave tonight without at least praying for Dr. Barber and his staff, and for all of you who have come on this line, because we've come this far by faith, and we need the everlasting arms of our God to uphold us and keep us strong during these difficult times. So, Father, I thank you right now for your divine hand of protection on Dr. Barber, his mind, his heart, and the task that you have placed in his hand. Because on this day, we are reminded that Dr. King asked the question, where do we go? Are we going to be in chaos or are we going to be in community? We choose the latter, oh God, to fight for the right to vote and to fight for folks who can't fight for themselves. We thank you for his staff. Continue to surround him with the love and the devotion that they have been committed to this task to carry out the legacy and the dream of the Poor People's Campaign that Dr. King started before he was assassinated. Father, we give you praise. We give you honor in the mighty, wonderful name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Pressey. Lady Lawrence, please.
I'm Lady Lawrence from Roxbury, Massachusetts, a Black 65-year-old disabled woman. I'm honored to be one of the voices for Mass for Moral Justice. Our nation was in crisis before COVID, a moral crisis, and that crisis is what we're here to address today. Incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, Black, unhoused, poor, everyone must have the right to vote and be counted. Slavery is still legal in America. The 13th Amendment only ended private slavery. Here in Massachusetts, our government was going to send prison slave labor to build the wall on our Mexican border. This was stopped by public outcry, but we shouldn't have had to fight to stop this. We can't call ourselves a moral democracy and use prison slaves. The Poor People's Campaign calls for moral justice for all, and the end of the filibuster is the only way forward for passing this bill, this voters' rights bill. We need to have the full effort of everyone to win this fight. It's not Democrat or Republican, rich or poor, Black or white. This is just basically right and wrong. So, whatever cover, or verbiage is used to cover it up, when people say states' right, tradition, political compromise, will not fool us. We're not stupid. We know when our rights are disrespected. So, calling on the senators from West Virginia and Arizona to do the right thing and end the filibuster. Help pass the new Voting Rights Act. And if you won't do the right thing, at least be honest. Acknowledge that you're not going to act for voting rights. And anybody who's not acting to end this kind of discrimination in voting is basically voting to maintain the status quo. President Biden, we are encouraged that you are speaking up, but you can and must do more along with us. You can't defend democracy over there. We don't have democracy right here in America. You need our votes. And if you don't do more to protect our rights, our votes won't be there for you. Go to West Virginia and Arizona, vote every month, and force the nation to deal with racist voting laws. Campaign to replace senators who refuse to end the filibuster. So the voting rights bill is passed now, or it is passed and their replacements take office. Passing the new voting rights bill is just the beginning of this work. Reconstruction is not finished until we are finished dismantling all of the structural, racial, and economic inequalities. Thank you for this chance to speak.
Thank you so much for those powerful words. And thank you everyone who has been participating today, everyone who has joined us online across the country. I'm going to turn it over to our co-chair for Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival, Reverend Liz Theo-Harris, to close us out.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been amazing, y'all. Thanks to the powerful moral voices, the leadership coming out of communities across the country, from the states that are all impacted by voter suppression, by economic injustice, by the lack of expansion of healthcare, by all of the problems that the 140 million people are experiencing who are poor and low income in this country, but who are rising up, as we heard today, who are coming forward with solutions, as we heard today, who are stopping at nothing less than victory. The words of Matthew 5 were running through my head as I was hearing these powerful leaders today. We should not hide our light under a bushel. We have to let our lights shine. We have to have our voice heard and counted. We have to have our voices out in the public. And so that is what we're doing in the Poor People's Campaign. That is what we're doing all across this land. We're uniting together. We're organizing together. We're mobilizing and registering and educating and engaging and empowering people into a movement, a moral movement that can rock the very foundations of this nation and make life better for everybody. We are going to continue to organize, and we want you all to join us. Join us in the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Join us as we organize and push for June 18th, a mass poor people, low-wage workers assembly and a moral march on Washington. We are going to continue to fight because we know nothing less than continuous struggle is going to lead to the victory that we're having. Victory is ours. Victory is ours. Victory today and every day that we fight is ours. And so we, in our movement, say, we're going to move forward together and not one step back. Thank you for joining. Thank you to the powerful moral voices. And let us indeed organize, 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 because we can and we are. Amen.
We welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful. A new, unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk, and we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together.
When we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third Reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
Together, we can change the world until the poor are lifted, the workers are paid, the sick are healed, the vote is not suppressed, police killing is stopped, land and water is not poisoned, war is not pushed, promoted and promulgated. Humanity is respected. Children are protected. Civil rights, labor rights, human rights are never neglected until these things are actualized. We've got work to do. And if we do it together, if the rejected work together, generations yet unborn will rise up and remember us for the work we did. And together we will change the nation.